Good evening and welcome to the May 30th meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Call this meeting to order and also ask everyone to please silence their cell phones at this time. It's with my happiness and great relief to introduce a full ZBA board to you at this time. To my far right, your far left, is James Morse. This is his first meeting, and welcome, James. He is our newest associate member of the board. To his left, your right, is Jerry Patamas, who is a full voting member of the board, followed by Ken Foreman, who is our vice chairman. My name is TJ Hurry. I am the chairman of the board. To my left is Ed Van Kuren, who is also a full voting member, followed by Bob Dugan, who is a full voting member as well. With us on the far right is Mary Barry, who is associate member. Also with us tonight is Noreen Stockman, who is our zoning administrator. And with us tonight as well is Ashley DeMello, who is the recording secretary and the assistant to the board. The Zoning Board of Appeals is charged with applying the zoning bylaws for the town and considers requests for special permits, variances, and appeals as provided in the town bylaws, which have been approved by town meeting and the Attorney General's office for the Commonwealth. All decisions made by the board are made through the public hearing process. The board's goal is to hear testimony from the applicants and the public, and also to allow a full and fair discussion of the project prior to rendering a decision. To begin each hearing, the clerk will read the public announcement of the hearing and then present any pertinent information from the file, such as referrals from town departments and summarizing correspondences to and from the board. The applicant or the applicant's representative will then have 15 minutes to make a presentation, and time may be extended by vote of the board. The board will then ask questions to the applicant, and then the public will be invited to comment. Public comments should be directed only at the project, and we also ask you to please refrain from making any personal or derogatory statements, but such comments could include an opinion in favor or in opposition, or just might simply be a question about the nature of the project. The chair will limit discussion in the interest of time if comments become repetitive. All members of the public wishing to speak should wait to be recognized by the chair and should come to the podium to the right here and your left. And we also ask that you please state your name and your address for the record. And in the interest of time, each person recognized will have a limit of 2 minutes regarding public comment. We will then either close or continue the hearing. When the board is satisfied that enough information has been presented by testimony and in the file to make a decision by motion and vote of the board, the hearing will be closed. In the alternative, we may continue the hearing to a future date and time certain. After the hearing is closed, however, no more testimony may be taken. As for board discussion and possible decisions, the board may then further discuss the project among ourselves and make a motion to either deny or approve the project will be made and voted upon. Such a motion will include a summary of key findings and conditions. An affirmative vote of 4 members, which is a supermajority, is required for approval of motions on special permits, variances, and appeals. A split vote, such as a 3-2 vote, is a failure to carry and would result in denial of the project. Under Massachusetts general law, if a special permit is denied, the applicant cannot return to the board for 2 years unless the project is substantially different. And turning to the agenda for tonight, we have 2 new hearings. We also have a number of open meeting agenda items. So we will go forward with the first application on the agenda tonight, application 19-19, Save on Haddam LLC, 561 Thomas B. Landers Road in Hatchville.
So, application number 19-19. Apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit pursuant to Section 240-57G of the Code of Falmouth to allow 4 parking spaces for display of used car sales. The subject property is 1.8 acres of light industrial zone land located within the West Falmouth Harbor Coastal Pond Overlay in the Wildlife Corridor Migration Area. There's no comments from any department except for engineering. It doesn't currently have effect on public rights of way, but they must not have any stormwater runoff on public rights of way, town way, or abutting property. And there's no letters in the file for or against.
And
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, fellow board members, Noreen and Ashley. Welcome to your new position, Mr. Morse. My name is Stephen McKenzie, and I represent Savon Haddam LLC. In 25 years of coming before this board, this is probably the most straightforward, easy, simple application that I've ever had. We're making no changes whatsoever to the site. We're asking for a modification of 2 previous special permits that were issued on this particular property. In 2015, this board issued a special permit for a fuel transportation terminal with a 5,000 square foot building. There were 12 parking spaces on the property at the time. And in 2018, there was another special permit issued for an above-ground storage tank, 8,000 gallon tank to fuel the trucks that are on the site. That was later amended to make the tank below ground. We're making absolutely no changes to the site whatsoever. We're just asking to redesignate 4 of the excess parking spaces for used car sales. Johnny Haddam, who owns Savon Haddam LLC, has owned several gas stations in the town of Falmouth for many years, and for more than a decade, he's had used car licenses. Some of those facilities right now are operating as other businesses, including the convenient MD that was on Main Street opposite of the corner of Dillingham Ave. So those spaces are no longer being used for used car sales. So what we're simply asking the board to do is to allow us to redesignate 4 of the excess spaces for used car sales on this light industrial piece of property. Outside of that, there are no changes whatsoever to the site.
okay, thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Turn it into board questions. Mary, do you want to start us off?
I have no question.
Bob?
No questions?
No question.
Ken?
No question.
Jerry?
Is there any reason that specifically prohibits them from selling cars at that location?
No, he just needs a special permit under 57G. He needs a special permit to be able to sell them on this site, and that's why we're here today.
In addition. Okay.
Anything else, Jerry?
No.
James? Nothing? In the past regarding similar applications, I think we've requested that so-called spill kit be on site, just in case if there's any leakage from the vehicles. Would the applicant be amenable to that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else from the board? Turn it to members of the public. Any have questions, comments, concerns regarding this project? Anyone out there at all? Okay, seeing none, back to the board. What would be the board's pleasure?
Move to close the hearing?
Second.
Move to close by Ken, and I'll give that to Ed as a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And how would we like to proceed?
I move to approve.
Second.
All right. Findings?
Meets the conditions of whatever he cited.
240-57G.
Eloquently said, Jerry.
No changes to existing site except for redesignation of 4 existing parking spaces to be used for used car sales.
And the applicant's amenable to having the spill kit on site in the case of anything goes awry. Anything else for findings?
Straightforward.
It is. It's nice to see. Should we move on to conditions
Per plans?
or plans?
Per whatever you just said about the spill prevention?
Spill kit, sure. Any other conditions?
Do we need to put, do we need to say just no additional parking spaces, or is it covered with the plan?
I think it's covered by the plan.
Yeah.
All right, so if we're all set, that motion to approve was made by Jerry and second by Ed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you just pass me back the plans?
Oh,
Sorry.
Thank you. Next application we have is application 40-19, Maywad, 0 and 213 North Falmouth Highway in North Falmouth.
So application number 20-19, being all persons deemed affected by the Board of Appeals under Section 11 of Chapter 40A of the Mass General Laws, you are hereby notified that Gaudette F. Mewad of Northeastern Mass has applied to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a comprehensive permit pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40B, to construct 8 duplex homes totaling 16 units, of which 4 units will be affordable. The subject property is 0 and 213 North Falmouth Highway, North Falmouth, Mass. Referrals went out to all departments. There are detailed referrals with engineering and water in the file. Where this is a 40B, they're pretty long, so people can review the file for. And currently, no letters of comments for or against.
They've had their customary department head meeting regarding the project.
Yep, correct.
All right, and for the applicant tonight?
They're just.
Good evening. My name is Nick Mirioni. I'm here representing the owner for on this application. With me is,
Is the mic on?
is the microphone working? Maybe you can't hear me. The microphone's on.
Thank you, Noreen. We're all getting used to the new AC system here, so thank you.
Again, my name is Nick Mirioni. I'm here representing the owner under this application. With me tonight is Mike Borselli from Falmouth Engineering. We're going to let Mike explain the engineering on the project and the details, and then I'll be back up, and Mike and I will answer questions that the board may have. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Michael Borselli from Falmouth Engineering, and I represent the applicant. I've just put up on the screen a locus map of the general section of North Falmouth where the project is located. If you look closely, there's a highlighted yellow parcel, which is the actual address, 213 North Falmouth Highway. That property, as well as this property that is narrow at the street but widens out behind 213, is the subject property. It contains 3.7 acres in total land. Behind it is land owned by the town of Falmouth, shaded in yellow. You will notice residential developments to the south, to the west. This is North Falmouth Highway. Off to the east, on the very far right, you'll see the Route 28 highway. To the north is a subdivision along cul-de-sac with houses surrounding it. To the south is a road, McManamy Drive, another cul-de-sac, and just south and west of the site is Wing Road, and the development that it leads into. We're just south of the Route 28A Rotary and Curly Boulevard, which goes off to the west, just to get your orientation. This is a rendered version of the drawing that has been blown up. You can recognize the shape of the land. The 3.68 acres with frontage on 28A. So the proposal is to have a common driveway that leads into the site that terminates at a cul-de-sac. In this area, at the cul-de-sac, there are 6 buildings clustered around the cul-de-sac. They're duplexes. So there's 12 units clustered around the cul-de-sac. At the lower area, you will see 2 other buildings or 4 additional units for a total of 16 units. The math equates to approximately 4.3 units per acre. The roadway is actually a common driveway. If you look at the referrals, we recognize and design this to be a driveway, not a road layout or a roadway. That being said, though, the actual travel surface, although it's a driveway, has been designed to meet all of the standards of the Falmouth subdivision regulations with regard to width, alignment, and grade. By that I mean the pavement is, overall width is 22 feet wide. The cul-de-sac has been designed to meet the turning radius for a cul-de-sac street in accordance with the subdivision regulations. The degree of slope of all the driveway surfaces meets the minimum and maximum slopes allowed by the subdivision standards. The drainage system that's draining the development has been designed in accordance with the Falmouth subdivision standards. So effectively, this is like a subdivision road, but it doesn't have the formal road layout surrounding it in the individual lots that you would see in a common subdivision. There were 2 that I had shown nearby to the property. Those are standard cul-de-sac subdivisions. The property will be served by a common on-site septic system. A series of pipes and manholes will collect the wastewater, and it will be treated in a series of tanks and then pressure dosed to a common leaching field that's shown in blue in this blue rectangle. This septic system has been designed to meet all the standards of Title V, the state sanitary code, and the town of Falmouth health regulations as far as requirements for flow. Each of the units is proposed to have 3 bedrooms. They're designed to have, each unit will have a garage for a single car. And you will notice that the driveways are common. There's the common wall between the 2 units. I'll use this unit as an example. Will allow for a garage for each unit that are adjacent to each other, and a shared parking area in front of the garage doors. We have also scattered throughout the development some additional parking for guests. You'll note that there's 4 alongside the driveway here, and then in the cul-de-sac along the outer perimeter of the actual roadway are an additional 7 spaces, all outside the perimeter of the actual formal driveway itself, so that vehicular traffic can circumvent the cul-de-sac and the cars won't interfere. We did have a initial department head meeting earlier in the process. We took feedback from the department heads, including the fire department, who were satisfied with this. The water department, which you have a referral from, much of the referral is standard operating procedure, and most, if not all, of the information on our standard details reflects the requirements of the water department. We're proposing 2 hydrants, one at the cul-de-sac and one midway up the roadway. And there's also a hydrant out on North Falmouth Highway nearby. I've met with the town engineer subsequent to the department head, the interdepartment meeting, to go over some of the details of his issues and concerns. I took notes. It's all, again, standard things that we will address, but we wanted to get all the feedback from you before we made revisions to the plans. But the referral from the engineering department, we fully understand and expect to address all the issues within his report. which is pretty straightforward. We're proposing a bus stop for the kids that may live in this development at the bottom. It's likely to be on the north side in this location here. And we've also proposed a play area in the back, in the undeveloped part of the property. We have also met on site a couple of Saturday mornings ago with neighbors. They were invited to come to the property to get sort of a preview of this meeting, and we met with a few of the neighbors and listened to their issues and concerns. And then I had a subsequent meeting with a couple of the neighbors. Mr. Wilson, the direct abutter, and Mr. Afarian, I believe, is one lot removed. And one of the things we talked about is a concern for speeding on 28A and ensuring that there's acceptable sight distance, especially looking to the south or to the left as you exit. There's a significant amount of brush and invasive vegetation in this section, and we are very much aware of that and plan to remove all of that vegetation. In fact, much of it will be removed to make way for this drainage structure, this leaching drainage system that's here. But we did a preliminary measurement of sight distance looking to the south, and with the clearing of the vegetation, there'll be over 290 feet of sight distance. One of the comments the engineering department made was to provide a sight distance, they call it a sight distance triangle diagram to demonstrate that you meet the town standards for sight distance, and we will be providing that on a revised plan. This plan also shows, at the request of some comments made at the interdepartment meeting about showing nearby adjacent houses. So you'll see on this rendered version of the drawing the nearby adjacent houses that surround the property. You'll note there's none out here because this is the town owned property. This building that I'm circling with the mouse is actually not a dwelling. It's like a garage building, like a contractor's garage building. It's a metal roof steel building. I think that sums up the general overview of the project. And we're both here to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelli. We'll turn it to board questions, unless you want to add anything else at this time. Okay. James, do you want to start us off?
Just for clarification, the fire chief has signed off on the parking plan. I'm just looking at this, and 2 parking spots per unit, one in the garage, one behind it, and, you know, people have guests or otherwise, that cul-de-sac can get pretty congested rather quickly. The fire chief is okay with this parking plan?
The fire chief is, the zoning bylaw requires 2 spaces per unit, so they're provided, and then there's the additional 6 spaces surrounding the cul-de-sac. So I think we received no negative comments about that.
Okay, and I'm happy to hear about brush getting cleared back on 28A for sightline, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jerry, anything?
Are there gonna be sidewalks?
At the moment, there's no sidewalk proposed. We considered it, but given the fact that this is not a throughway and it's a common driveway with limited number of residents, that also does have grass shoulders, we didn't think it was necessary.
Is that the reason why you're not designing to meet town standards?
Well, it is designed to meet town standards. The road itself is.
They allow no sidewalks in a subdivision?
I think it's taken on a case-by-case basis, depending on the number of houses and the length of the road. My experience in regular subdivision applications is that some have sidewalks, some do not.
Would you be amenable to sidewalks, let's say, on the northern side where there's not as many houses?
I would leave that to Mr. Marioni.
Right now, I'm saying amenable, you know, we could have some further board
We
discussion.
could consider it.
So this is gonna meet standard Title V, there's no requirement for advanced treatment? Or
There's-
is there? You said
No.
standard Title V.
Since it's a comprehensive permit application, we're asking for relief from that requirement, so there's nothing proposed
Relief from what requirement?
to do any enhanced treatment.
What standard does, I don't know of any standard right now. It might be nice, I might want it, but I don't know if anything's
Yeah,
requiring me to do it.
there's a section of the zoning bylaw under coastal pond overlay districts that suggests that denitrification may be required for certain types of developments in accordance with standard zoning bylaw requirements.
Okay, I forgot about,
Yeah, like,
okay.
it could be necessary for a formal by right subdivision application as opposed to a comprehensive special permit for an affordable housing project, so.
And let's see, trash, no, town will pick up the trash, I can't, well, who picks up the trash, who's responsible for snow removal?
We intend to have private trash pickup and private snow removal.
So that will be in the documents.
We would expect that, yeah, and I think the town engineer made a comment, since it's a common driveway, the town wouldn't be responsible
For
for snow removal.
snow, okay. So every duplex would then have disposal, like anybody else, you put it at the end of the driveway, something like that?
That's what we expect, yeah, barrels.
Now, one of the things you said that, and I think when you said 8 duplex buildings, 4 to be affordable, I think you mean 4 units, or you're saying 4 duplex buildings?
Well, there's eight buildings,
16 units,
16 units, 25% of which will be affordable, which is 4 units.
4 units, okay, that's, I have no other questions for now.
Hey, Jerry, Ken?
I'd second Jerry's concern about sidewalks. Did you say something about a bus stop?
Yeah, we're proposing to designate an area at the intersection for kids to wait for the bus, assuming this would have a formal bus stop at the entrance.
And how long is the roadway?
The roadway to the split, at this point, is 550 feet long. If you count going around this cul-de-sac, it's an additional 200 feet. So it's 550 to the split, 750 going all the way around.
So if you anticipate kids going to the bus stop, don't you think it'd be a good idea to give them a sidewalk to walk on to get there? Okay.
I don't know that I want to,
Lighting plan? Do you have a lighting plan?
we don't have a lighting plan at this time, other than lighting on the buildings, but I'll let Mr. Marioni speak to that.
I think what we plan to do for lighting is put a post light at the end of each driveway for each unit, so there'll be 2 just outside each driveway where walkways converge with them. In the middle, we'll throw in some common lighting between the 4 units at the beginning and the 12 units in the back.
Approximately where on the plan would that be?
You can
Approximately, this is a mailbox shelter.
Okay.
So we'll probably put a light right near that so people can see that at night. And then if another one's needed in this area, we'll put another one. Then there'll be one on each side of the driveway for each unit.
So, all right, well, following up on that, I guess, is there a landscaping plan of any kind?
There is not a formal landscape plan yet. We know we'll have to provide one.
So both landscaping and lighting plans will be included eventually?
Yes, but lighting will be subject to need as the site's being built. If we feel we need more lighting, we'll put more lighting in. We'll show you the minimum lighting we're gonna provide.
There you go.
And if we feel we need more, as we see dark spots, we'll put it in.
Okay, I mean, there is a concern about the impact of lighting on the abutters too, so Just
Right.
adding a whole lot more lighting might be something that needs approval, in my view.
We will submit, for final approval, we'll submit the actual fixtures we plan to use and any lighting to go, lighting, electrical requirements to go with it.
I confess, I haven't had a chance to look at the file. Is there a pro forma in the file?
There is,
Okay.
yes.
And then there's a play area shown on the plan. Can you describe a little bit what's in that
What they shown?
play area?
Oh, it's just a grass area where people can play ball.
So there's
or
there's not active
whatever. No equipment.
equipment of any
No.
kind. How large an area is that? So that's going to be cleared, I presume,
It is.
and graded in some way, it looks like, I guess.
Cleared, graded, and lawned and seeded. And we chose that area, first because it's the best area for it, and secondly, the town has suggested to us through the planning board, town planner, that there may be some footpaths that are in the town-owned land, and asked if we'd be willing to try and connect to them. And we said we would, if we can find them. We haven't been able to find them yet. But if they're there, we'll be happy to connect to them. It'd be
But I
an
guess I'm
asset
just,
for
you know,
us.
this is an issue with a lot of these small 40Bs is the idea that there's some recreational space for the residents, especially the kids, so they don't need to go off-site
Street.
necessarily. And I'm just wondering, what's the actual area there, and what would it be suitable for in terms of recreation?
Playing ball, this is soccer, I'm not saying it's a soccer-sized field.
Right,
It's-
that's what I'm trying to get a handle on, is,
It's an area where they can gather and do what they would like to do, rather than having to play in their driveway or their yard, their own little individual backyards, where people
I'm
can
just
go
looking for a dimension. Okay. And then, so, in terms of waivers, what specific waivers? It looks like you're asking for a waiver from, in coastal bond overlay, from any requirement of additional
What we,
septic treatment.
I don't know, if in the application, you'll see the narrative we put in there as it related to the waivers. And it was sort of a blanket waiver for anything in the bylaws that are required to build this project as you approve it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Might like to see a little more specificity.
Well, we've, in my experience anyway, in dealing in some other towns on matters like this, they've found it more acceptable to accept a blanket waiver, because you're not granting any waiver on anything that's not required to build a project as you've approved it. And if we get real specific on waivers, and then you get out there and somebody challenges something, you have to stop the project, come back in here, and waste administrative time and have a hearing to get another waiver that you probably should have had all along. You just forgot to specify it, or you didn't realize you needed to specify it.
Okay, I've sat in on a bunch of these.
I know, it's never been done in
We
Falmouth.
usually get a very specific list of waivers that we
If
grant.
that's what the board wishes, then that's what we'll do.
I think that's it for now.
All right.
I can answer Board Member Foreman's question. It's effectively like a rectangle of approximately 50 by 100, 50 foot wide by 100 feet long.
Okay.
Play area.
Ed, anything?
Yeah, I was also concerned about the sidewalks. As far as the bus pickup in the, down by the end of the road, is that up where the stone wall is now? Would that be cleared for the bus to pull in and stop?
You mean like a deceleration lane?
Yeah,
No. No, that,
the bus would stop in the highway,
yes.
okay.
I can speak to that, too. If I could answer that, I know from local knowledge, from getting caught behind the bus stops on buses on 28A and late for work, that the bus, on all there's several cul-de-sacs coming down onto 28A from both sides, and the kids queue up right at the entrance to all the different roadways. The bus stops right on 28A, the kids get on and they move along. So, we're gonna have this little, area to wait, so you're not right on the highway. But, and nowadays it seems like the parents are there with the kids in the cars until the bus comes, and then they get out of the car and run out onto the bus. But that's what we plan.
How about snow removal?
It'll be privately done at the responsibility and expense of the.
You have a place to dump the snow if you get 6 inches?
Well, if we get too much snow, it'd have to be removed and stockpiled off to the side in places that are not interfering with the driveways, but.
Have you actually been to the planning board?
We have been at the planning board, just on an informal basis. We've got comments from the town planner, and we also presented the plans to the planning board to get feedback a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay. That's all for me.
Bob?
So there's large gradation changes. Can you give some detail on the retaining wall that's gonna be needed? Specifically after that unit, that second duplex. It looks like when I went out there, that where, the way it's staked, the duplex right now falls in the middle of a hillside.
Yeah, well, if you've been out there, you know the topography's, moderate. So this one area in specific, adjacent to the detached garage, maybe if you walked in and you parked there, or you familiar with that area, is right here. You can see the contours are tighter together here. This is a steep slope. It was probably historically mined when they built the garage, and they just sloped it at a steeper slope. So this building will require some excavation and regrading. So this retaining wall is significant. It tapers down. It'll have a significant height in this one area. It's proposed, it'll average 10 to 12 feet in height in that one spot, and then it'll taper down, pretty quickly to 6, 4, 3 feet wide by the time you get to this end. And it's proposed, the design hasn't been completed. A structural engineer is going to design it, but it's gonna be masonry, is the plan.
As far as the affordable units, do you have suggested placement that you're looking at?
Do you have?
We don't have a specific place yet, but they will be spread throughout. For instance, like one here, one here, one here, one here.
So are there any
You can't see that.
specific spots you're looking for? Because we can suggest where we would like to see them, but
You can suggest where you'd like to see them, sure, and we'd certainly listen. But we were thinking one here, and then across the street, and then at the end of the cul-de-sac. But we'll certainly work with you on that.
where you have the mailbox placement, was there any reason you didn't do one at the top of the hill so that the people up the top don't have to walk down on the bottom?
Any engineering reason why we can't? I
Or
think
could
we
you maybe
it
put a
there
set,
just 'cause
maybe
it
one
was-
at the top, one at the bottom, so that,
Oh, 2 mailboxes.
well, it just, unless they do individual mail delivery, it seems an odd location because the slope is so steep. If somebody wanted to walk down on the mailbox, and currently there's no sidewalk.
We were trying to encourage exercise.
The Fitbit.
Good try.
We're gonna probably be at the mercy of the US Postal Service on where we do this. I mean, I'm sure we could put 2. That wouldn't be an issue as long as the Postal Service is happy with 2. But if they say they want it here, then these 2 folks are gonna get a lot of exercise down here. But we have to, we're happy to do 2. We just have to, talk to the post office about it.
I would jump on the same comments, Mr. Former, that we usually do see specific waiver lists versus a general, so I'd like to see the specific waiver list. But I do have a question regarding the plans that you submitted. The plans that are submitted in the file are all labeled for another project with another developer. Do you have rights to use these plans?
No, we don't plan to use those drawings either. They were just to give the board an idea of the 1,800 square foot unit we plan to use. We will be engaging an architect to draw our own plans, put our own floor plans inside, which I don't believe you really,
I guess my question would be, if you don't have rights to use these in the file, do you have your own plans you can submit to the file, or get rights from these people? Because these are even labeled for a different project, and they're specifically on here that they were written for a specific developer by a specific architect. So they're not like a stock plan? So
No.
did you do any plans yourself, or?
no, we haven't done them yet. I would like to add, though, those plans were given to us by the Board of Appeals, suggesting that's the kind of plan we'd like to use, not necessarily to use that plan. But the footprint worked for us, and
I understand what you're saying, it's odd to get an exact plan, even labeled the address of this development, and then saying these are the plans we want to use for ours, so maybe you could talk to this developer to use them, but
no, we have other plans in mind that are within that footprint that we want to use. We're working on already, but we don't have them done yet.
so will you be submitting those, though?
We will, yes. You will need final plans, I'm sure, for this anyway.
Yeah, we'll need final plans with you, but will you be submitting them for the actual review of the project? Or are you looking
If
just
you
to submit
wish.
them at the end?
If
Yeah, so I'd like to see actual plans that just aren't using,
elevations and floor plans, you mean?
yeah, just not using, unless these people say it's okay to use the plans that they own.
Okay.
Tend to use it.
That's the only question I have.
Mary, anything?
Will any of the units be handicap accessible?
If someone buys a unit that needs to be handicap accessible, yes, we will make it handicap accessible for them, but we're not gonna build handicap units that don't need to be handicapped because we didn't have a handicapped person buy them. So they will be built for someone that needs it, yes.
And is there any consideration of solar panel use?
I don't, again, the owners could do that, I suppose. Our condo bylaws are gonna speak on those things, and I don't think the orientation is perfect for it, and there's a lot of trees in the area. It might not be the best site for that, as you can see, going around in circles, and I don't think we'd wanna see them on the front of houses. So, the backs of the houses are gonna be heavily treed and not really oriented for solar. So, we did think about it. I don't think it's gonna work here, and we're not incorporating it in the basic design.
All my other questions have already been asked.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noreen, I have a question regarding the application, if it's complete or not. I understand if the applicant wanted to come in early to get a feel from the board about how to proceed. But in terms of, not having a waiver list and landscaping, lighting plan, things of that nature that the board typically requests, so is it fair to say that the application is not complete at this point, or?
So those are things that technically can be submitted as you are progressing with the hearing. That's not one of the specific requirements to file. So they have met the requirements to file as far as control of the property, the project eligibility letter. So they've checked off those boxes, but, excuse me, they do need to submit the specific list of waivers that they request. We cannot waive the entire zoning bylaw. So you need to go through there and ask which specific conditions you're looking to have waived, and then the board would vote those individually, as well as, like you say, the specific plans for landscaping, et cetera.
And I have a laundry list of items I can.
I'm sorry.
I have a laundry list of items. I've been keeping track of what everyone's been asking. I have a few questions of my own. Regarding any draft condo documents, because I believe this would be a condo.
Yes, yes, it would.
Would you be amenable to providing any draft condo documents or regulations, anything of that nature to the board to review?
We're gonna submit more than a draft. We're gonna submit, you need to approve the final condo docs.
Right, but I don't think we have any yet.
No, my understanding, the way this works is we're looking for approval with the conditions that we submit those things for your further approval before we get what's called a final approval letter. So that's why we didn't submit drafts of those, because the cost of that is, it's quite a bit of money on all the things that you're asking for that you typically submit when you have an approved project that requires you to submit all these things.
Right.
That's why we haven't submitted them yet, not because we're trying to be uncooperative in any way.
Oh, and I'm not accusing you of being that, just trying to get a feel for where you are in the project. Regarding I know the board mentioned the bus stop a couple of times. Are you envisioning like an open-air seating or maybe a covered space for the kids with regard to
We
a bus
are
stop,
looking
or
at
is that just a
shelter.
designated spot,
No, shelter,
an actual shelter?
waiting shelter, yeah. Which shelter might include a roof and a little bench.
And with regard to lighting on the proposed project, with regard to especially the common lighting, and I would say perhaps the rear lighting of any of the structures, would you be amenable to such lighting be dark sky compliant, so it's not shining on adjacent properties?
Absolutely, yes.
And kind of a follow-up question there regarding any buffering at all. Can you enlighten the board to any proposed buffering?
The landscaping is as important to our buyers as it is to the abutters, so we're gonna buffer as necessary, whatever the board requires, and then additional as necessary to create as nice of an environment for our buyers as we can for the abutters.
Maybe you haven't had that conversation yet. Were you envisioning anything like natural vegetation or perhaps fencing or a mix of both, depending where it is on the property?
Probably a mixture of both. So site-specific as we get out there.
And I think that does it for me for now. Does anyone else have any immediate?
Yeah, I have a
Questions?
couple of follow-up. I would suggest that making doors wide enough to be handicap accessible may be something. You know, you sell a house today and it's not handicap accessible. The next person may want it to be. I don't know internally, but there might be some standards. The affordable units, I may suggest that at least one of them have some handicap accessibility, and right now, the biggest thing I can think of is adequate door width. I'm sure there's a laundry list of things, and, so you may want to look into that as an availability, something to be built in. The other thing is covered at the light in the backyard. What about a low-level light at the playground to ensure it's not an attractive nuisance for, if you say there are bike paths or anybody else coming there and causing problems? It's a suggestion right now, but it might help some issues. I just read something, I think it's proper. Since this is a private driveway, the police cannot enforce parking on that private driveway. People park in the street, that's up to the condominium association to, and maybe that will be something in your documents.
Will be.
Okay. The last one is, have you considered reducing the fee or waiving the fee for the 40B units?
We're working with those numbers now. You understand how that works, that a certain amount of their income can go towards their housing cost. The lower we make their fee, the more we can charge them for the unit. The higher we make the fee, the less we can charge them for the unit. We're probably leaning right now, and it's not a final decision yet, we're probably leaning towards making the fee higher, selling the units for a little less, so that the market rate units, when they're looking at their neighbors, they're paying the same condo fee.
That's one of the things people say, you know.
Yeah, that's why we'd probably do it that way, and that could cost us $10,000 or $15,000 a unit on the sale to do that. But that's, I think for, if you will, political reasons, that's within the community, I think that's the way we're leaning.
I have no further question.
And regarding any potential draft documentation, like the condo docs, association docs, draft monitoring agreement, things of that nature, check in with Noreen about those in terms of town council reviewing them. You know, in the event that we do grant this project, I would hate to see it held up because those documents were provided too late in the process to town council in order for them to review them. Any other questions from the board at this time?
I got one.
Sure.
Well, how long do you expect this project to take from start to finish? Upon approval.
It's really a product of how fast they sell, I suppose. We're at a pretty good price point. We're in the mid-5s. And we're being told by several local brokers that we've talked with that there's a need for that, and it's a pretty good price point. They actually think we could get more, but we'd probably, time is money, we'd probably be more interested in, we're happy in the mid-5s, and we'll probably just try and get it over with, just move it along.
So what do you think, 2 or 3 years, or?
Oh, I would hope not. I would hope if we can get approval before the winter, final approval from Mass Housing and this board, that we could get it started, get the road in before the winter's here, and have the unit, be building the units over the winter, and maybe by this time next year, or next summer, be finished. That's what we would like.
Okay, anything else?
I'm sorry,
Do you have a schedule for, a sales schedule for how many units are sold as affordable to allow how many to be used, to be sold as marketable?
I'm sorry, I missed
So
that.
on the sales schedule, if you sell an affordable unit, so we have a ratio that you have to sell an affordable unit and then a marketable, so you're not selling all the marketable units first. Do you have a schedule on that at all?
No, but I'm sure that's typically a condition, that every fourth unit has to be an affordable unit.
And on the handicap accessible, even though you said right now you don't have any, and I think Jerry alluded to it, so that there's handicap visitable units, layouts that you can use, and those are the layouts where you can make wider doorways and stuff now, and if somebody buys them later on, they're easier to convert. So you may want to look at making some units at least handicap visitable. You don't have to do a lot of changes in the beginning, but some of the doorway sizes and stuff are there in advance, so that if somebody later on wants to convert, it's less costly for them to convert over.
I think I can cooperate on that. I just want to be sure on the terminology, because I've heard handicap accessible, the term you're using, then is handicap
Yeah,
compliant.
so handicap
is
accessible would be all set up right now if somebody was disabled to use the house as it is.
Without the access even being provided. You could
On
add the
handicap
access.
accessible, it will all be provided while it's required. Handicap visitable, you can do some wider doorways, hallways, so that if somebody later on wanted to convert the entire unit to handicap accessible, they don't have to put as much into it. The doorway changes have already been there in advance. Sometimes that's less costly for the builder, but it allows somebody later on, if they want to convert it over at an easier state.
On a resale you're talking about. I would say that we would be willing to look at that where possible. We would put wider doors in and a wider hallway accessing the bedroom. You still have the issue of a second floor with it's not just a one-story unit, but I will take a look at that and include that in our design where possible.
And now that you mention that, I'm assuming there'll be an elevator in this.
We haven't factored that in, no.
Handicap accessible and no elevator. That means all the handicap units on the first floor.
It has a first-floor bedroom, so the people...
Oh, wait a minute. This is not a two-story, I'm sorry, these are duplex houses.
Yes.
Okay, I misunderstood. Okay.
Just come back to the waste treatment. You're sending everything to a central leach field, right?
The collection system brings it to a holding tank that brings it to an additional tank that then pressure doses it into the leaching field. But yes, it's a common leaching field.
Common leach field. I just wonder if you might think about, there's these new layer cake systems that presumably denitrify, might be pretty efficient way of meeting the Coastal Pond Overlay District requirements and not add all that much cost.
I would add in, they may even be cheaper when you're building a new unit, according to discussions I've had with George. The layer cake system.
Cheaper than what? Cheaper than nothing?
No, cheaper than a hoot, excuse these are languages, a hoot system and some of these other things.
Yeah, undoubtedly than some of the more active ones.
Yes.
You're just excavating a little deeper, putting in some wood.
Wood chip, yeah, just, I'm sure the engineer can look into
I
it.
think Mike knows about it.
I have one more question.
Just a way to get rid of the nitrogen. It's a big issue in.
At no cost to you, possibly,
Well,
minimal. It's not, it's passive. Let Mike get back to us.
I'll talk to Mike about that, too. I'm not sure I understand it, but yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just have a question about, there's one, because on the plans you had, we didn't see the other adjoining properties. There's one that's particularly close, it's off of the picture here. If you could show, can you tell us how far that is to the building closest to it? Yeah, the one that's
This one?
down,
Southern,
the southern one,
southern
This
end,
one.
yep.
yes.
One of the comments I saw in the engineer's referral was to revise the plan to show distances to the property lines from the surrounding houses. I can tell you by just my observation that this house is approximately at this corner, is about 15 feet to the property line. It was built 15 feet from the property line. I will tell you more specifically with actual dimensions on a revised plan, but that's by my eye of knowing the scale of the drawing.
Thank you.
Mike, while you're up there, that's a second retaining wall at the top, right? Near the house you just
This
proposed?
one, this is another one, this is not as dramatic. This has this is about 5 foot tall at the tallest point, same material.
Any other questions from the board?
I just have one last question. Are there any fences proposed at all?
When we do the landscape plan, we're gonna show some privacy fencing. And it's gonna be staggered to, there won't be a strict placement, it would be as needed to get privacy between units and buildings and neighbors.
Anything else, Bob?
No, that's it, thank you.
All right, so we'll turn it to public comment at this time. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns regarding this project? Sir, in the back, I think I saw you raised your hand first.
I'm Roger Fairbanks, I live at 218 North Falmouth Highway, essentially across from where the leach field's gonna be. Just three things. Number one, I have no problem with these things going in. That part doesn't bother me, but Where I want to comment on two things. Number one, the bus shelter. There's a bus stop at Wing Road, which everybody in the Wing Road Estates area, a lot of kids. Next was at Tennecy Hills. Having another bus stop 400 feet away, I don't think the bus is going to do that. So having a bus shelter there might be a waste, but whatever. But my real concern is number three, a safety issue during construction. When I live at 218 across on the west side of North Falmouth Highway. When I come out my driveway, I look to the right, and it's even worse for 216 next to me. Coming up from the south around Hathan's Corner, then it curves back to the right, and then it comes also up a hill. Doesn't show the rise right here. You can't see cars coming. The people in front of our stone walls on the west side, they park their construction vehicles there. All kinds of vehicles have been parked there. We can't see around them. We pull out, you almost get clipped from cars coming up from the south. So my only request is, put some condition on here that all construction vehicles have to be left on the property during the construction. Otherwise, we can't, it's very hard to get out of our driveways, just because you can't see. Sightline, that's all it is. That's my only concern.
Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks. And just so you know, typically with projects, we do condition it that during construction phase, that any vehicles, anything of that nature would be situated on site.
Good, good. Makes me happy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fairbanks. Anyone else, sir?
Good evening, Dennis Stunin, 223 North Falmouth Highway. I abut the property right next to the leaching field. And I did attend the informal meeting earlier this month, and as Mr. Foreman noted, the project manager is long on generalities and very few on specifics. And but what we did gain from that meeting was that, generally speaking, the intent is to put as many properties on that, or as many units on that property as possible for the lowest cost. And some other things that were discussed were the fact that that's a historic zone, 200 feet from the street, and yet that closest building is going to be 30 feet from the street. And some of the construction materials, for example, plastic siding. And as a homeowner there, I know that, you know, if I were to go re-side my house, there's no way that the Historic Commission would allow me to use plastic siding. And yet, because of 40B, they're going to be able to do just that. Somebody else at that meeting asked about fireplaces, and the builder mentioned that that would be an option, that they didn't want to offer that as standard because that would increase the cost. They also asked about the denitrification system, and again, they said that they were going to try to get a variance or a waiver on that, again, citing costs. So the primary objective here, I think, for this builder is to build this project for the least cost and sell it for the most so that they can make as much money. I asked him where the builder was from, where the owner was from, not from Falmouth, and really, in my opinion, has no long-term concern about the lasting effect of this project on the North Falmouth area. So I would ask that before you grant an approval on the waiver or the appeal, that we get some more specifics on materials, type of materials going to be used, and perhaps the condition of the condominium association, and what kind of maintenance schedule that the properties will have, and you know, is there any condition about what kind of vehicles can be parked on the street? Can they have construction vehicles? Can they have work vehicles? Can they leave their bicycles out on the street? Talked about lighting, that's also a big concern. And then, of course, I think the denitrification system should be a great concern. So I would like to have a lot more specifics addressed before some kind of an approval is granted for the project.
Thank you for your comments.
One comment, and this is for the general audience. You do realize, no matter how much the board may prefer to do something, if something is required by local law, it's waivable. If it's a state law, and I'll use denitrification, if we had a state law that said denitrification is required, we could insist on it. If we have a local preference, zoning bylaw, or just, we know we want to reduce less nitrogen. We couldn't withstand an appeal to the approval agency because we have no authority to require that. I may not like it and you may not like it, but it's something to look into, what we can do and what we cannot do as a zoning board of appeals.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions, comments, concerns regarding this project?
Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Alan Wilson. I live adjacent to the proposed development at 197 North Falmouth Highway. I would like to thank Mr. Maroney and Mr. Torselli for allowing us to come and visit the property. They were very open and tried to answer all our questions as best we can. I think from a jutting owner, really concerned about the environment, the safety, and issues revolving around drainage and the retaining walls. So with our meeting 2 days ago, where we were looking at the sight line and not including anybody in this board or in this room, we have members of the Falmouth community that mix up 28A with Indianapolis Speedway. So what happens is they come flying around. This is not every day. They come flying around the curve, and this is the curve going out here. So when I first bought the property, there was a lot of undercut brush there and trees, which my neighbor and I have cleared out, and it makes an immense difference. But still, there are people that come flying around that, all right? And the whole concept of visibility is huge, because one of the aspects of there's a utility pole. I can't point it out. Mike will know where it is, because he and I talked about it. That's right on the sight line. And it's a critical utility pole, because if that utility pole goes down, the whole road goes out, all right? So there has to be consideration as to what to do with that utility pole. Either it's moved or changed, or there's another utility pole put across the street, or whatever, because it's a real, you can see it. It's right there, black and white, when you're there looking at it and down the road. All right? So that is something that I would ask the board to seriously consider, making it a stipulation, and even visit and go out and look at it yourself and see what that is. Now, I'm sure with somebody who is a skilled landscape artist, and how you could do it, you can mitigate or reduce or alleviate that issue. The other thing I want to request is that recently at the North Falmouth Elementary School, they put up a yellow blinking light, and it has had an immense effect and slowing people down going by the school. So I would like to have the board consider, not right across from the driveway, but close to it, where there's this yellow blinking light, almost a caution, that allows people to, one, all right, slow down and be aware of the fact that there may be some other cars coming out, all right? And it's very effective. And if one of the key things with 28A, because 28 is full of cars at certain periods of the year, so 28A becomes the main source of travel from Bourne all the way into Falmouth. So there's a lot of cars, all right? And they're all from out of state. Thank God they're coming here, but they're still from out of state. And on top of that, you have all kinds of motorcycles, all right? We think we have more motorcycles coming down 28A than we do in any other part of Falmouth. So what happens is that whole area there is really an opportunity for some serious action to occur without some changes in the utility pole, without some system of alerting people who are out of state that this is this is a wide-open area and how this would work. So that is just, that's a top priority from our standpoint for safety reasons, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You have exceeded the 2 minutes, but
I've gone on my 2 minutes?
you have, but your points are well taken with the board. I want to
Could
thank
I
you for coming.
add a comment?
And by the way, we have a lot of turkeys in the area.
We do in East Falmouth, too.
One of the things, and I don't know, and Mr. Boselli could probably check on this, if this is a state highway.
It is a state highway.
I'm not sure if our traffic advisory committee could put in a blinking light, or maybe the applicant can request it as part of the project, that the state consider allowing a blinking light there. I know on a previous 40B, the attorney for the applicant suggested they would apply, and someone help me, I'll have it at the next meeting, to the police department to do some type of traffic study or a traffic something.
There's a officer who's designated as a traffic coordinator, for lack of a better term, with the department, who helps with
Right,
traffic
so
enforcement.
that, you know, if the neighbors don't start calling on this, nothing will get done. And it's not just calling up to complain, it's calling to say, we think we have a safety issue with speed, or something along those lines, in this area.
Thank you, Jerry. And just to further elaborate on your point about 28A, that is a state highway, and as a board, we're very limited as to what we can actually condition. It falls under the purview of the Massachusetts DOT, so they trump any local regulatory authority. But that having been said, does anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns, sir?
Thank you very much. My name is Jack Afarian. I abut the proposed development here. I'm at 195 North Falmouth Highway, here next to Alan Wilson. I share Alan's concerns about the safety. And actually, 2 years ago, on my property, there was a lot of overgrowth vegetation here, and it was hard for me as I'm coming out of my driveway to see what was coming up from the south to the north. I took it upon myself to clear that all out for safety reasons and made it look a little bit better. But the sight lines were better, and there is a lot of vegetation up there that I agree, if they can eliminate that, it's gonna alleviate, minimize anyway, some of the safety issues with the fast traffic that does go by on the road sometimes. My other concern, there's been no detail, but I agree with one of the other speakers here. There's a lot of specifics that still need to be laid out as far as the vegetation between our property line and the buildings there, if it's going to remain natural, how much is going to be cleared out, so that there is some privacy between our properties and the new buyers. I'd like to see specifically what they're proposing for that at some point for the approvals. And another question I had is there any possibility that the cul-de-sac could be moved a little bit more to the east, this way, so it's not as close to the abutters here? I don't know if that's doable or not. If there's any reason that it is that close, it could be moved that way. I'm not sure, but I'd like that to be looked into if at all possible. And that's all I have for concerns. Thank you.
for coming. Did you have a-
I just want to make a comment. Just because sometimes it makes it easy for the board, if anyone had any comments tonight that you spoke of, it would be nice if you could submit them in writing for the file. It's easier for us to reference when we review the files. So any of your questions or concerns, just so there's something actually in the written record. Thank you.
You certainly can. Does anyone else wish to comment on that Yes?
My name is Ariel Rubin. I live at 45 McMenemy, which is, I think some of the things that we are worried about are, the questions that we had coming in that were unanswered. Some of them remain unanswered. which is what will we be looking at when the construction is finished? And I think some other butters asked, what will remain that's there currently, and fencing, and for us, the retaining wall, what will that look like to us? I think also a question is the schedule for clearing. What will take place? How long would it be? How involved is it? And how that affects the drainage for the abutters who are currently there. I think some of the other questions that I was interested in asking have already been asked. One for the board is, what is the regulation for housing per acre for North Falmouth, just out of curiosity's sake?
Regarding that actual zone, I would have to double check, but,
RB, it's usually 40 or 45, 40?
I'm sorry?
One house per 40,000 square feet.
Yeah.
maybe?
It's one per, so it's one per 40,000. But of course, under the 40B, the developer can apply under this state law to waive, to include more density.
What's the normal regulation for typical builder?
Ken's trying to look it up for you
Okay.
right now. Don't want to put you on the spot, Ken, but you're,
Pressure.
I know.
It's either 40 or 45,000 square foot.
How many acres is that?
An acre is 43,560
43,000?
square
Thank you
feet.
very much. I
don't
guess
know why I
that's
know
pretty much all the questions for now. Thank you.
I knew it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ma'am?
Meter is 39.37 inches. Yeah, right.
So, my name is Alberta Anderson, and I actually live in Ariel, Drive. And so I just have a question about the topography back there, because if you walk back there, it is very rocky, and the ground is, very hilly. Lots of animals live back there. We get deer and bunnies. I know that's not a big deal, but it is kind of sad to see those go. Would there be any blasting because of the rock layout back there? And if that's done, then what happens then?
Any what?
So my concern is about blasting, because it's a
Blasting.
very
Makes
rocky,
sense.
hilly area back there. In fact, it's almost all rock if you walk back there and the topography of it. So my concern is the blasting and what it would do to our houses that are there, as well as, just construction. And then also with the drainage, so if they're doing the blasting, the drainage as well, and the runoff from that.
Mr. Borselli might be able to address that if you are getting up to address that.
Yeah, I have to agree with the other person is, if it's Falmouth land on the other side, why couldn't this move just a little further? I mean, as they've said, our house is very close to this line, and the retaining wall there.
Town of Falmouth land, is that what you're referring
Right,
to?
so the town of Falmouth land's on the other side where there's no houses and no land, so to move it more that way
Right.
would be useful.
I can just address that real quick. They do need to remain within their own property line regardless of who owns that property. And two, and I'm sure the developer can address this further, but without a set of waivers, knowing what the setbacks are from the proposed houses to the property line, we would need those set of waivers to get a better idea of how and when those can be moved.
Sure, understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Borselli?
I think on 20 feet, they could
With regard to the topography, all of the work that we're doing for the cul-de-sac is going to result in grading on the edges of the property being such that it is contained on our property. There'll be no regrading or filling that would change the drainage patterns in a way that water would be redirected off of the property. In fact, there'll be an overall reduction in surface water flow off of this land because of the regrading and some of the lowering of the ground surfaces to flatten it out for the cul-de-sac. So this wall, for instance, will be is there because the land will become lower than it is today by the property line. I would have to go up and take a look at the rocks and boulders that you're making reference to. My experience in this area, it's on the glacial moraine. We have a lot of boulders. We do not have ledge, unless the boulders are enormous, which meaning bigger than a car. There may be some of those, but most of them are able to be managed by an excavator or at most split. There's a special attachment, not blasting, but it breaks the rock into more manageable pieces without the need to blast. So I've never encountered a situation where that couldn't be handled.
Sure.
Just to follow up on the question about moving things a little bit closer to the townland. You've got the 20, looks like 24 or 5 feet of separation from the property line. It seems like you might have some latitude to move it 5 or 10 feet.
We will take a look at moving this whole
The little
cul-de-sac
S-
as a
little
unit
S in it, yeah.
away from, if north is straight up, we will look at trying to move the entire cul-de-sac and the houses as a unit to the north and east as best we can. So maybe that combined with some buffering of landscaping, evergreen plantings and fencing will help mitigate concerns for the neighbors. But we'll look at it. I think there might be an opportunity to shift it somewhat. I don't know if it's gonna be an appreciable amount, but it could be some amount that's better than this.
We normally limit public comment to, you already got up to speak, so we usually limit it. If you do have anything else, just please send us an email, or you can come to the next meeting. Does anyone else have anything else to, yes, ma'am?
Hi, my name is Esther Grady, and I live on 41 McMenemy Drive. My property is right here. And I know everyone else has mentioned this, but I just also wanted to voice my concerns on the drainage. I have walked this property. I've lived in this home for about 20 years, and this property is elevated higher than our homes, and I'm very concerned about the drainage. I know you just addressed that, but it is definitely a concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns tonight?
So one point for the board and for those present is that if there was to be blasting that needed to take place, they would do a pre-blast survey, which would essentially, as an abutter, they would inspect and tape your house. So if there was anything that did take place, you would be protected in that way. They would also have to have insurance for that. The fire department would oversee that per state regulations, but they could not do that in advance without your knowledge. You would have state law protections.
And at least with regard to any drainage off of the structures themselves, would they be, if you could speak to that, Mike?
There was another comment from the referral from the engineering department that we agree with, that suggests that we put dry wells in for the back sides of the buildings. The front sides are designed to pitch and drain onto the roadway and would be collected by the catch basins on the roadway system, but there's an opportunity to put some dry wells for the back of the units to help mitigate the runoff.
Thank you.
And during construction, erosion control and things like that to prevent excessive drainage, mud, or whatever.
I'm gonna reiterate that the way that the site is regraded is it's actually gonna be depressed into the landform, so there'll be less potential for any surface water to come off onto other people's land.
Everyone else have any other questions, comments, concerns tonight? Okay, seeing none, back to the board. Does anyone else have any other follow-up questions, at least for tonight?
Request for continuance?
We will, but if we could just speak to the developer again, and there's a number of things I think we'd be expecting for the next meeting. Just so you have an understanding, I'm sure you've heard the comments from the public in terms of their concerns regarding drainage runoff and the site view from the pulling on and off to 28A. I know you said you were amenable to clearing. But with regard to other things that the board usually expects of applicants, the condo docs, association docs for the town attorney to review, a monitoring agreement, landscaping plan, a lighting plan, things of that nature. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
Waiver list.
A waiver
Waiver
list, of
list, yeah.
course.
And I'd love it if they came back with some feedback on the D-Night, because I think this might be an ideal spot to
Has
implement
potential.
that.
You
I'd
can look into
concur with-
that.
Especially the layer cake system.
And Mr. Borselli indicated that you'd go out and take a look at the site again regarding the rock formations in the rear of the property. Anything else that I'm missing?
It'd be nice when they come back, they enumerate the changes they did, sort of makes it flow easier
Just more specifics.
in the more specific thing.
Thank you. I don't think we heard anything here tonight that was unreasonable. We'll certainly look at everything. Some of the requirements, like condo docs, I'd like to get some clarification on. What are you looking for at this point? Your full set of condo docs with?
Yes.
It's hard to do that without, because that requires operating budgets and.
I understand, but just speak to Noreen further about that, because I do know that town council needs to review all that. I would hate to hold up the project because that documentation might be submitted late.
Is there such a thing as some boilerplate or chapters that,
There are.
some things that would be standard conditions, like for parking in the street?
We know any good condo attorneys we could refer to?
No, I'm assuming there's some
Happen to know a few.
boilerplate that covers
You're right.
60%. And, maybe you already know.
Well, I know that the condo docs can cost $10,000 or $15,000 to do, and we would like to do them as part of the final approval, so we know we have to do them, and we know you have to approve them through town council. But, having said that, if you want them now,
Maybe a draft or, preliminary.
No, I mean, a draft would be great.
Yeah, it doesn't
Obviously,
have to-
nothing final, but a draft would be good. I'm just telling you, speak to Noreen further about anything that town council may or may not have to review before final approval.
I would like to also see just a different setup of these plans.
Yeah.
True elevation.
Yeah.
True plans.
Site specific, yeah.
Anything else? All right.
So motion to continue then, do we have a date?
Second that.
Do you have any date in mind about returning to the board?
Have they gone in front of the planning board?
What do we have available, Noreen?
Looking
said
at
they
June
had-
27th.
So June 27th?
it's the next meeting?
That's our next available.
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Will you have gone in front of the planning board for site plan review?
You don't need to do that.
Oh, you don't need to, I'm
No,
sorry.
just,
I'm sorry. You
We're
don't-
the sole permit.
No, you're the special permit granting
Yeah,
authority.
okay, I'm sorry, I get.
so then motion to continue to June 27th.
Just, that's a bad date for me, but I'm not gonna hold up the project. I mean, obviously, I can, under the new rules, I can review the meeting and submit certification that I've reviewed everything, but just so everyone knows, I won't be here on that date.
No, important for me to know.
What's the next?
No TJ.
July 11th.
The following date is what?
Is Ken gonna be here?
I don't,
So if it's
think
not,
I'm-
if we had an issue with June 27th, the next date's July 11th.
Okay.
Let's try to make June 27th work, I mean, just
It's my vacation week.
take your
Haven't
vacation.
had one in 5 years.
That's okay.
I'm gonna take one.
we're gonna go, Cape Cod?
How do I guess?
Top secret.
Yeah. I hear the lower Cape's nice.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you want to put it on for that date, that's fine. I just won't be here.
Or July 11th, whichever.
Do you want to do July 11th?
How much time do you people need?
They may need extra.
That's true, too.
Would you like to take
Everyone
July
will be here
11th
on
ins-
July 11th, is that?
We will
July
be-
11th.
We will be here.
Mr. Borselli says that would give him more time to do the things that are needed.
July
so
11th.
Rather than
Okay,
press.
so motion to continue to July 11th then.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so here at Town Hall, July 11th at 6:30. Motion was made by Bob and second by Ed. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we take a quick break?
Sure. We'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, we are back from our 5-minute break. Thank you for bearing with us. On to our open meeting agenda items.
Mr. Chairman, I would propose that we take the board administrative approval of Bogosian Development LLC at 587 Main out of order.
Okay, motion was made by Ken. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. And just for the record, Bob Dugan has recused himself from this, so he's already exited the room. And we'll wait for the applicant to...
Mr. Chairman, may I put something under the record, please?
Yes, of course you can.
Good evening for the record, James Morris, Associate Member. I have filed with the Selectman's Office as well as the zoning administrator two conflict of interest disclosure forms pursuant to Chapter 268A. The first is in regards to Mr. Clower, who did represent Cape Cod 5 when I refinanced my condominium 5 years ago. I do not believe it to be a conflict of interest, but I have filed the necessary disclosure forms. The second is that I believe the lease holder, or a tenant, excuse me, in this particular administrative request is a close personal friend of mine, Mr. Sean Daly. I have filed the necessary disclosures, and I do not believe it to be a conflict of interest.
Okay.
But I wanted that before we begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. I know that was a mouthful, right?
It was.
And for the I think the applicant needs to just acknowledge that, I think, for the record. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I certainly don't see either of those issues as a conflict. Thank you.
The other reason is, as an associate member, I don't even believe I'll be voting this evening on this project, so.
Sure. All right. Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Okay, for the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ahmed Clower Law Firm here in Falmouth, and I represent the applicant, Bogosian Development LLC. We're here tonight with regards to the property at 587 Main Street. We obtained a special permit for this project in July of 2017. That special permit was under Section 240G1B, which allowed density in the business redevelopment of greater than 6 units per acre. What we proposed was two single-family residences, which previously existed on the site, to remain in a new mixed-use building, which would be first-floor retail with 3 apartments located above. The special permit was being sought for the purpose of density. The building and the site design were otherwise allowed by right. The mixed-use building and the site design, as constructed, do differ slightly from the plans that were approved, and this was noted when the applicant was going to seek occupancy for the mixed-use building. The first floor, one of the first floor retail units, Eat Your Heart Out Cafe, owned by Sean Daly, who's here with us this evening, is ready to open, and we were trying to get the occupancy permit, and the fact that there were discrepancies was noted, and we're here tonight to try to address them. Condition number 7 of the special permit states that any deviation from the plans submitted to the, shall be submitted to the ZBA for approval. This was not done prior to implementation of these changes. And this building, as I mentioned, is constructed, but we're here tonight to try to correct that oversight. I'd like to take a moment to explain those changes, provide an explanation as to why they occurred or what happened that led to them, and then discuss the remaining steps that are still required on the site. There are 5 areas that have been identified as changes. The walkways and the patio areas outside of the proposed mixed use, outside of the mixed use building, have increased slightly from what was originally proposed. The building itself, the mixed use building, is 3 feet longer than was originally approved by the zoning board. That was reflected, the building as constructed is what was reflected on the plans that were submitted with the building permit application. That was due to a clerical error, which I'll explain more in a moment. The decision of the ZBA states that the basement is to remain unfinished for storage. In the build-out for the commercial units, partitions were added to delineate the spaces for each of those commercial units, and also the various types of storage within. The 3rd floor layout of the building has been modified. Simply a change to the layout, number of bedrooms remains the same, and the roof line was altered. There was a break added to the roof line as opposed to the straight ridge that ran from east to west that was approved by the board. I'm going to go into each of those changes a little bit individually. The walkways were changed in order to provide handicap access from the parking. If you note on the site plan, you'll see that the handicap parking is located in essentially the northwest corner of the parking area. As it was approved, someone parking there would then have had to come through the parking lot and go up the sidewalk along Nye Road, then Main Road, then into the building from the front. Once this was realized, the applicant ended up making changes to the walkways in order to accommodate this. These changes have made the access better and more convenient for anyone that might be parking in that area, specifically the handicap area. But those changes have necessitated changes to the landscape plan. The updated landscape plan, which is shown here, was submitted to the board last week. We had submitted a plan. Ms. Stockman came back with some comments, which were then adopted and incorporated into those plans. The length of the building parallel to Main Street has increased, and as I mentioned, this was due to a clerical error. Longfellow Design, who was the construction arm of this project, hired someone to do the building structural plans. And the structural plans, which were based off of the permit set, underwent some revisions. And during that process, the length of the building changed. It wasn't noted by anyone that the length of the building had changed, but the plans that were eventually submitted to the town for the building permit did differ from the site plan. It wasn't noted by anyone, by the applicant, by the building department, or the planning board, or the zoning board who signed off on the plans that this was the case. I want to be clear, we're not blaming anyone else for the error here. We didn't catch it, and the blame ultimately lies with the applicant. But there were some mitigating factors in the fact that the plan, due to correcting structural issues that arose during that process, changed a little bit. And in doing so, it was just not caught that the building itself was longer. I think it's important to note that the building as constructed still meets the setback requirements, being more than 10 feet from the side yard line. It doesn't change the lot coverage has been fixed to remain what was approved. The footprint of the building as approved was 3,163 square feet. What was constructed was 3,324 square feet, a difference of 161 square feet. In order to address this, specifically the lot coverage by structures, the applicant removed sheds at the rear of the building to keep the lot coverage the same as had been approved. You'll note on the plans that we submitted that we're showing a lot coverage by structure of 19.3%. And the plans that were approved said 19.2, but there was an error in that the existing bulkhead, which is shown right here, was not counted on the previously approved plans, and it should have been. When that's accounted for, that lot coverage is 19.3%. The basement, as I mentioned, there's been partitions that have been constructed to delineate the space and the various storage within those spaces for the commercial tenants. As was noted in the correspondence, both from Ms. Stockman and my response to her, the building commissioner, Rod Palmer, believes that one of these storage areas is set up as an office space in that it has electrical outlets and some cables for a server. This area here is intended for the the tenant's restaurant computer system and his camera system. In addition, it's also intended to be used for storage of liquor. He is also a caterer and is required to have any liquor locked appropriately so that it can't be accessed. So that's intended for storage space. That being said, if the board feels that this would constitute an office, I have amended the administrative application that we submitted to say that if the board felt that this would be an office, that they permitted as such, but we don't intend to use it as an office space, and that's not what it's designed to hold. The third floor layout, as I mentioned, changed. It was just kind of a rearranging of some of the rooms, but the number of bedrooms remains the same, and the roof line was altered, which now has a break in the roof line, as you'll see here, as opposed to a straight ridge that previously ran east to west. It's really worth noting that even with the changes, the building and the site meets all the applicable zoning regulations. The lot coverage by structure is 19.3%, which is the same as what was approved, and below the 20% that's allowed by right in the district. The lot coverage by structure, paving, and parking is 57.9%, which is below the 60% allowed by right. It meets all the setback requirements. None of these changes, individually or together, are significant alterations to the nature of the approval. It doesn't change the nature of what was approved, and didn't do so in a way that would have made any of this an unapprovable project, and are all within the by right limits. Ms. Stockman sent a very thorough and detailed correspondence and I wanted to address some of the questions that she raised relative to the parking and the layout of the site. She noted that the decision requires that there be resident-only parking in the parking area directly behind the mixed-use building. Those have been designated on this plan, and signs have been installed at the site, noting that they are for resident use only. In the parking area closest to the mixed use, there is it is limited to left turn only. A sign has been installed this week, which states left-hand turn only. The fencing has been installed between the parking area and the residential units and around the exterior of the lot. There's one small section that has not yet been completed, but the fencing has largely been installed on the western, northern, and southern sides of the lot, as well as between the residential unit to the rear of that parking area. And lighting, shielding has been installed in the lights in order to direct any light downward and to be dark sky compliant. And a question was raised as to the landscaping. We were hoping to have the landscaping done at least largely by today. The landscaping company wasn't able to accommodate that, unfortunately. We do have $11,000 worth of materials that are ordered and are to be delivered tomorrow, to be installed by Clover Landscaping. And our hope is that that'll be done early next week. The most pressing issue that we're facing right now is trying to obtain occupancy for Sean Daly and Eat Your Heart Out Cafe. The delay in the occupancy, which is not the board's fault by any stretch of the imagination, but has had and continues to have significant impact on both him and his employees. The building commissioner and the town have completed their inspections and are ready to issue a certificate of compliance, a certificate of occupancy rather, upon the assent of the zoning board. So we're trying to find a way to facilitate this happening. We understand that mistakes were made. We understand that we should be coming for this before work is done and not after. But we're here now trying to correct the issue. I'd be happy to address any questions the board may have at this time.
Thank you, Attorney Clower. And just for the record, it's been a while since we've actually had a full board, since Bob recused himself, and I guess James entered his disclosure. I'm just going to appoint Mary as the voting member on this. And with that, Mary, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I have a question about is, when were the walkways put in?
When were the walkways installed? Late March, early April.
And at that point in time, was that asked, was there something submitted asking at that time?
No, there wasn't.
Because that wasn't in compliance?
No, there wasn't, and that's one of the issues that we're asking for the board to approve this evening.
Anything else?
Well, the only other thing, I like to read these rules. And the condition, as I read it in the special permit, said, any deviation, no matter how minor, from the plans submitted and approved.
Mhm.
Prior to implementation.
Anything else, Mary?
That's it.
Okay. Bob?
The-
I'm sorry, Ed.
Yeah. I guess, we haven't had a chance to look at all this. Is there any way we can approve to have a occupancy permit only for this, the restaurant or John Daly's, and have that the rest of it left open till we've had a chance to look at all these things? Like, I'm concerned about the height of the building.
We submitted a certification letter from an engineer stating that it's below 35 feet.
We still haven't had a chance to look at any of it. And is the sign, I was there today twice. I didn't see the sign for the left-hand turn.
It's installed.
It is? Okay. And then also, there's something about 10 parking spaces up in the back?
That parking area is being, that parking area is to be paved next week.
All right. So we could approve I feel we could prove for occupancy permit for Sean to start the restaurant, and the rest of it, when it's all really completed, then we take a look at it. And that way we'll get him in business.
Anything else?
No.
All right. Ken?
Well, unfortunately, I'm just not very sympathetic to the developer on this one. Our rules are pretty clear, procedural rules. If administrative approvals are for minor changes, this building is 3 feet longer than it was originally proposed. That's not a minor change. There's changes to setbacks, to lot coverage, changes to the upstairs layout. Why? I think the abutters deserve an opportunity to come back and comment on these changes. And to do anything less, I think, is really cheating those abutters of an opportunity to chime in on these, on what is going to affect them. So I believe we should not grant an administrative approval and reopen the hearing.
Okay. Jerry, anything?
I want to concur with Ed. I think we should, if possible, allow the occupancy of the commercial restaurant, Gourmet Delight. I can't remember names. I still would probably agree with Ed that maybe when we had a chance to review everything, we revisit the entirety of the changes. I think they were a mistake, as the planning board might have said, an incredulous oversight, but anybody familiar with construction understands this happens. It falls on the developer. But I don't know if these in total constitute a significant change, given that they seem to all be in compliance. Yes, they're different, not that they're de minimis, not that we have a definition of de minimis, but it would appear that it's, if there was a lot of concern, the public could have shown up tonight, even though they might not have been allowed to speak. I don't know what significant new information we would get by requiring a hearing. I do have concerns, and I think it was mentioned before, it was implied that the change in layout on the 3rd floor could lend itself to being 2 units. Would you be against going back to the original layout?
Given that it's already constructed, I mean, I think it would be difficult. I think that having had roommates in the past, what happened was the rooms were simply moved to, as opposed to being next to each other, to opposite ends of the building. If you, I remember when I was in law school looking for an apartment with a friend, and we decided pretty quickly that if we had an option between having one where rooms that weren't directly next to each other and rooms that were separated, you'd want the one that was separated. It gives a little more privacy to roommates who are sharing a unit.
How does that fit in with the, I mean, they don't have to be family members? I mean, is this now a de facto, wrong word, rooming house?
No, but I mean, you could have 2 people decide to rent an apartment together.
That's
Who
true.
aren't necessarily family members. I mean, I think many people in their 20s have roommates that aren't spouses or family members. This is not designed for a family of 5. It's designed for,
Total number of bedrooms remain the same at all times?
number of bedrooms remains exactly the same.
Could they be subleased?
I mean, I don't think there's any provision in the bylaw that would prohibit that. I don't think that's anyone's intent. But if you rented to somebody and they decided to rent a room to someone else, as long as they're not running afoul of the bedroom count, I don't see that being an issue.
I do, but go ahead.
I do want to go back to what you said, which is that these changes, while not de minimis, don't change the nature of what was approved. The building, you know, at the risk of getting out over my skis, I think that if the building had been 160 feet bigger at the time of application, I don't think there would have been an issue had the building been this size. I might be mistaken in saying that. But given that it still meets the setback requirements and doesn't change, you know, it's not really a noticeable change to the naked eye. It's not as though a wing was added or, you know, something dramatic was done that would stand out, that the nature of what was approved remains essentially the same, and that the board could approve it administratively. So I agree with you completely in saying that.
For the record, Mark Bogosian, I'm the developer and the builder in this case. So I want to, first by saying mistakes were absolutely made, and the buck stops with me, so those mistakes, without question, fall on myself. For this project, I felt that my staff was not at the level to put the structural drawings together for a mixed-use building. So I hired a consulting company to do that for me. When I got the setback, I did not notice the change. We submitted it to the town in good faith. Nothing was done. We did not realize that change. We submitted our as-built for the foundation when we were building construction with that change. Again, did not realize that change. At any point, I'm very aware of the board and coming back, and now much more aware on the commercial level that these minor changes clearly should have been here beforehand. It absolutely has been a learning curve for me on this building especially, and I understand that I need to make sure myself and my team is diligently checking plans from consultants to make sure that everything we're getting approved in front of your board and in front of all the town is submitted to a T of what it is. And if not, we come back. When we realized we were going to do the foundation, we did apply for an administrative approval, and we went for that process. And I point that out because at the time, we're going to be doing something different. Let's go in, let's apply for an administrative approval. So on this project, we did that throughout the course of construction. If that day that we were submitting the plans with the 3 feet additional space, which clearly were labeled right on it, you know, if we had caught that then, we would have asked for it at that point. It was clearly an oversight, and we did not realize. When the egress became an issue, or the handicap accessibility became an issue, I had it staked of what was going on at that point. Sean, Christian, they said, well, people are gonna come all the way around. The concrete company was there. That's when we made a comment to saying, we're gonna have to update our site plan, we're gonna have to do all this. That's when we realized, wait a minute, there's a problem. And that's what brings us here tonight. So again, I apologize about the mistake. The buck stops with me. I will take full responsibility for it. And I can assure you, something like this would not happen again.
A question, well, do you have any questions, sir?
Go ahead.
If we allow the occupancy to occur and continue the discussion on administrative changes, and we decide as a board to require a hearing, guess I'm asking Noreen, does that negate the ability for the commercial building to open? Or we can ask them to get back to us, I don't know.
Technically, they can't issue a temporary or permanent occupancy if there's a zoning violation. That being said, they're also currently resolving matters with the town planner.
And the town engineer and so on and so forth. So that, what happens if we require a hearing?
The occupancy would be put off.
So that would delay occupancy of the Mr. Sean O'Malley, I'm sorry, I forget names quickly. Okay, so that's a consideration for the board.
Could I offer some potential solution? Is if we were to get administrative approval, I would be very happy to wait on any other occupant moving into the building except Sean, until everything was addressed, and we could then have another come back to show all the landscaping complete, make sure all the parking's been addressed, all the signage. I know the sign has up, but to confirm everything's up to standards. It'll allow Sean to get in, and at the same sense, everything stays put until everybody's had a chance to see the property and understand
The violations don't affect the restaurant part of his operation, so the violations are all outside his purview, so I don't know if that would help us to allow.
Yeah, so it doesn't work that way. You can't separate the baby from the baby, unfortunately, because it's all one building.
So the quandary we have is, if we accept allowing the occupancy permit, we're almost saying eventually we have to rule on this as an administrative change versus another public hearing.
I would say it's probably the case.
I would be willing to go on record as saying I wouldn't move anybody, I would not have anybody go there. I'd post a bond or,
I don't know legally how we do that.
But I'd be happy to come back for the next hearing after everything's 100% complete, have everybody a chance to walk the property and confirm that.
Back up, if we have a hearing, the occupancy permit is negated, correct?
I think you meant administrative.
Okay. Postponed.
What I'm proposing is if you accepted the administrative approval in order to get Sean in, I still would go through with that process, even notifying,
We're going to accept the administrative process, because there's, we might have additional questions or concerns. We're not approving it tonight, we're just approving the occupancy.
No, we're deciding whether or not we're gonna allow administrative approval.
Okay, that's true, okay, I misspoke.
With regard to administrative approval in our procedures, it says that involves minor requests from applicants that would otherwise require a special permit or a modification of a special permit. And Mr. Bogosian represented that, he proceeded in good faith, but a lot of these changes, I think they exceed the administrative approval process from this board.
Why?
Because they're not minor.
Well, mine
When a
is,
building is 3 feet longer than it was
That-
planned, it's not minor. When the entire landscaping plan is half of what was proposed, that's not minor.
I will rebut to say, it's 3 feet longer, but it doesn't matter, it's still within the setback.
Well, that's your view, but it's not my view,
So-
because I don't think this is a minor change. A minor change is, we needed to add an extra step, or the window placement was different. Changing the entire size of the building is not a minor
What
change.
impact does 3 feet have?
Jerry, it's not a minor change.
I'm asking you, I'm trying to
I don't
agree
care
with
what
you.
impact it is.
Well,
I care whether it's an opportunity for abutters to express their concerns
That's
over the
arbitrary if
impact.
you don't
It's
care.
not arbitrary, it's not minor.
Well, I guess we agree to disagree,
We do.
and I guess we haven't heard from the other board members.
Anyone want to weigh in on this side?
Yeah, well, I have a real issue with setting a precedent even in this case. I don't believe that this has ever happened before.
Do we, and I asked Noreen that, excuse me. Precedent has a legal definition. If it's a union contract, that's one thing. This board is not necessarily, and I don't mean to be lecturing, I'm trying to think of governmental procedures of where I've been before, and lawyers that have beaten me up. Precedent is case by case, and I don't think there's anything here that would bind us to a future decision based on the facts presented. In other words, if we say 3 feet here, someone wants to come 25 feet, and that's 25% of the building length, and it needs a setback deviation, that's a significant, this precedent doesn't impact that.
Well, the way I view it
Okay.
is this. we have a special permit that has conditions, and the conditions say if you need any deviation, regardless how minor they are, you have to have approval of the board before implementing the change. And if somehow that isn't important because they didn't stay within guidelines, I don't see how anybody else can't say, come back here and do exactly the same thing.
Guess-
And that's the precedent I'm talking about.
I guess I disagree based on my regulatory experience, and it's common fact. There were many permits issued after the fact because there was a deviation, no permit was applied, and they come and ask for a permit after the fact. That occurs pretty frequently. I shouldn't say, it's not unusual. It doesn't bound people. It just says, we made a mistake, we're coming back to correct it, and you weigh the condition. I know what you're saying, and I
So
hate
how
to.
do you correct a building that's 3 feet longer than it was supposed to be?
I don't think this board, and we could have some discussion here, is going to say it's worthwhile for this applicant to cut 3 feet off, and I don't think, if the abutters say we want it 3 feet reduced, they'd have to come up with some significant reason, shadow, I mean, it's 3
But
feet.
Jerry, until we hear from them, we don't know what their reasons are.
How many people are here now?
So if I can speak to.
This is this is a decision on administrative approval, therefore there has been no advertisement of a public hearing for the purposes of discussing it. So why would you expect them to be here?
Common sense.
Come on, Jerry.
People in this
So-
town,
Come on.
they pick up on everything, and when they have a concern, they show up, whether it's a,
They need to know there's a hearing.
And this
If
is
I-
an
if I-
administrative approval, not a public,
Right.
it wasn't.
they could have
Anyway,
objected.
Public
Mr.
hearing.
Chairman, I wonder if we have, I mean, we all have our opinions, that's clear. I don't think I'm unfortunately gonna change Jerry's mind on this. I wonder if it's time for us to vote on whether we can approve this administratively or need a public hearing.
Mr. Chair, if I could just speak to a few things, because there's been a bit of a discussion. and I'd like
Of course you can.
I'd like to weigh in on a few items here. The first is, the building didn't receive a special permit due to lot coverage in excess of what's allowed. The building didn't receive a special permit due to being non-conforming and being within any setbacks. The building itself, you know, is essentially a by right building. It meets, it's under the allowable lot coverage by structure. The site design is under the lot coverage by structures, paving, and parking. It more than meets the required setbacks. The purpose of the special permit was for density, and that's what we applied for, and the density remains exactly the same. There's been no change to the nature of the special permit. The building itself remains essentially the same. Yes, it is larger, and I won't pretend that it's a de minimis larger, but it's been addressed in that the lot coverage has been reduced elsewhere so that it remains the same. The difference is 160 square feet, which is, in the scope of the overall design of the building and site, is relatively minor. I do think that there's a few possibilities that are worth considering, which is if this matter was simply continued and we were able to perhaps reach out to the abutters and come back with correspondence from the abutters, or you know, make sure that, or have them submit something to the board regarding that, would be happy to do that. Alternatively, posting a bond is something that we could consider doing. But if there is a full hearing required, it's going to be crippling for Mr. Daly, and I'm asking you not to punish Mr. Daly for what has happened on our end, because a full hearing of the board will require essentially a 3-month delay, which misses the entire summer season. Between publication and the hearing and the appeal period following that, that would be, it would be devastating. And so I'm asking if this board can find a way, understanding that this board is not bound by precedent, and this isn't a stare decisis issue where they're bound by prior decisions. Each decision is unique and has its own mitigating factors and components. I don't think that, as I've said a few times now, the nature of the project, the nature of the approval remains essentially the same. The planning board did vote that they would take this matter on administratively. That was done on Tuesday evening. There were, I think, 2 questions from the engineers from the engineering department that our engineers are in the process of responding to, but planning has taken this on administratively, and their decision says essentially the same as the ZBA's decision does. So we're not in a position where we're gonna say, well, you did this on this project, we'll come back on another project after the fact because you did it on this one. We understand that mistakes are made. What we're trying to find a way is for someone else not to be punished due to the mistakes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could we have a discussion? I like the idea and the compromise of sending a letter to the abutters, a registered letter to the abutters with specific requests for a specific time frame to respond by email. Wait, I'm not finished, please. And I know I've interrupted you, but I've been waiting for a long time to say that.
You've never interrupted.
And the idea of, I'm not sure what the bond would do other than assure compliance with the outstanding things. So I'd like discussion on this, somewhat of a compromise. It's not a hearing, but we get information from the abutters, which other people had been concerned with.
My concern is procedurally what we have before us is administrative approval, yay or nay. I don't think this qualifies under our procedures as something we can approve administratively. Therefore, I think we need to reopen the hearing. It's as simple as that. It's not that I'm not sympathetic to the situation with the tenant, but this is not a minor change. We already have an enforcement issue in general with our zoning bylaws. We often make conditions and nobody's enforcing them, nobody's checking. It's a self-reporting kind of issue. If the abutters don't raise the issue, we never hear about it. I just feel this is an important situation, not unfortunately, that to impact the tenant and the business, but there's larger implications for the entire zoning bylaw and the way it's imposed throughout the town.
Could I make another suggestion for you to consider? In addition to everything else I said that you like, we ask for legal opinion. We control the procedures, but how binding are the procedures? Procedures can be changed by us. I don't think they're binding.
They can, I just don't think in this case they should.
Maybe one of the attorneys for the applicant, or Frank, would weigh in on it. I think he's gonna say, because I've heard him say it on the Board of Selectmen. These are your procedures, you can change them when you want, as appropriate. It's not something you do every day, but I think it's within the scope of administrative law or administrative procedures. And so, I mean, I don't know if the other board members would like some discussion on that.
I mean, I'll just weigh in. I agree with Ken. I'm extremely sympathetic towards Sean. He's a well-respected business owner in town, well-respected caterer. But with that having been said, with the administrative approval route, it's usually a straight-up yes or no vote. And what's presented before us, I think, exceeds what we normally review under administrative approvals. With regard to this project, I know the developer said that they proceeded in good faith, and I'll take that, I'll accept that. But what we have here is such a great deviation from what we previously approved. This was something that, this project is under the Business Redevelopment District on Main Street that this board has always, and the town as a whole, has always carefully reviewed projects. And this is just simply something that we didn't previously allow. So,
Mr.
I mean,
Chairman,
I'm struggling internally with
well,
it,
I mean,
but-
I guess the question is, do we vote to deny the administrative approval and then reopen the hearing, I'm happy to make that
Right.
motion if that's what's
And,
needed.
and in the event that we do vote it down, if they do need to come before us under the public hearing process, I don't think it would hold anything up 2 to 3 months, as they
No,
said. I think they
we
could
could
definitely.
try to fast track it.
I mean, that's just with the
Can I speak?
publication notice requirements. Every application we've handled runs about 3 months from the date of application to the date the decision goes final. And that's true for almost every application.
And that could put the guy out of business.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Amant. I mean, he's,
Mr.
I mean, I
make a
understand
comment?
the emotional issues of,
Can I make a comment, Mr. Hurry?
If you could, Attorney Allen.
Thank you very much. I'm very much an observer of this, although I'm a very interested observer because my law firm represents Mr. Bogosian. I'm Mr. Clowey's partner, but I haven't been very involved in this matter, but I'm listening to it. And a couple things strike me. One, a building permit was issued for the 3-foot larger building. And that means that the Board of Appeals administrator signed off on it and missed the change in the plan. It means that the planning board signed off on it and missed it, and the building department didn't pick it up. This is not I think you have to understand that. And there is actually a 30-day appeal period for people who are aware of a building permit to appeal. And I don't think anybody appealed during that time. And no town official came back and said, you know, we made a mistake. That 30-day appeal period gives people the opportunity to rely on the issuance of a building permit. Now, people make mistakes all the time. And I know it's Ms. Berry's first meeting here, but to say that this has never happened before, I don't think you know that. Mistakes happen all the time. And one of the things that the Board of Appeals can do and should do, and really you need to do, is solve people's problems and deal with situations that are messy. Government is messy. For sure, real estate construction and the permitting process is messy. Okay? This is not a case where there's any public harm to allowing occupancy of a portion of this building. None at all. And loads of harm to people, your neighbors, residents of the town. A lot of harm when it's unnecessary. Your job includes figuring out how to solve problems and not making it so convoluted and expensive that people are really hurt. Somebody's going to get hurt here. And it doesn't have to be, I don't think. So it's not an easy thing to do. It's messy. But come up with a solution that works for people. That's what I would urge you to do. And I think you can do that in this case. And there are ways to streamline it. We don't need to send certified letters out to abutters. If Mark Bogosian can go to the abutter and just get a letter and bring it in that says, we know about the problem, we don't have any objection to it. You know? So if you need more, and I can understand you protect the public, make sure neighbors aren't being affected, but figure out a way that if you can do that and come back next week or the week after that and with certain things, we can, you know, we'll work this out. I think you can do it.
Good evening, Sean Daly, Eat Your Heart Out Catering. I have a location behind Seasalt at 79R Davis Straits. This process to me is, you know, more emotional. I mean, less emotion and more about getting open as a finance. It's been a financial albatross for myself. I missed the Memorial Day weekend. I saw the commerce here in town. It was great to see restaurants open and people spending money and so forth and so on. But if I don't get this open, it's going to be a real financial albatross. I've got people that rely on me, family members, people that work for me. I employ 35 people. Like I said, if I do not get this open, I've hired people that have quit their jobs for me because I wanted to come work for the Eat Your Heart Out team. And I've been paying their salaries, and I've got no income coming into that location right now. I feel if I wait another day, it's gonna just put me that far behind. I've got orders that I've already had bought, and, you know, eventually have to pay for on a 15 or 30-day net term. So I'm up here today as not a business owner. I'm up here today as an outstanding citizen of Falmouth. I give back. I donate. I donate my time. My kids grew up here. A lot of people rely on me. And for 3 feet to put all these lives in jeopardy in my financial albatross is going to damage me. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to you, to Noreen, could we continue this for a week? I mean, we might have more information. They may be able to get, and I know it doesn't meet Mr. O'Malley's desire to do it tomorrow, but as you heard, there's some strong opinion that we should go to a hearing, unless the opponents that want a hearing are going to say, that's not going to change my mind.
Jerry, my argument would be, let's not continue it. Let's start the hearing process, get it over with, and get this all done as quickly as possible.
But we're going to get information, or lack of information,
What
from the
other
abutters.
information are you
From the
gonna get?
abutters. That's what you're concerned, there's procedures, but that's,
Well, then
then we
you're
have the
asking-
abutters.
If you're asking for the abutters to chime in, we're asking for a public hearing.
No,
You're saying this is not a issue that's.
What part of the attorney's statement, I mean, I think I'd rather have a.
I heard the attorney.
So that's
feel-
public input. We're worrying about the abutters. There's probably 10 of them. I have no objection to someone walking up to them,
Look,
but I would think a
this is on
registered letter.
Main Street. There may be others affected as well. It's a.
Go 50 feet from here. Go 100 feet from here. I mean, I think this is what we're here for. I mean, we're quasi-judicial.
I'm not even sure procedurally we can continue this. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's
I don't
equivalent to tabling the matter.
I don't even think we can continue administrative approval.
Can we table it?
I mean, we've been asked to
If-
do
if-
very
if that-
simply.
If it's a matter of coming back at the next hearing, we could withdraw the request and reapply tomorrow, if that would buy us another week. And if you thought another week would matter. I mean,
I can only tell you, Mr. Clower, it's not gonna change my mind. It may change others, but I feel this is and I'm totally sympathetic to the business owner, but it's not the business owner's problem. It's the problem with the developer. They didn't adhere to the plans or the special permit criteria, which says, come back to us if you change the plans. And so, I mean,
Could we poll the
I
members?
feel that, again, the issue isn't even just this building, it's the integrity of the whole process and how we deal with special permits. And if we administratively approve a change this significant, then it's basically saying, every time a project is approved under a special permit, don't worry too much about the conditions. You can make changes and come back after the fact, and we'll approve it. And I just feel that's not something that we can sanction.
Could we poll the members? So, could we poll them? I mean, why continue this if, what do we need, 2 people, and we get 3 that were concerned, are against them withdrawing the administrative application and coming back next week? That buys them a little bit more time. It gives,
Coming back next week with what, though?
to resubmit the administrative, can they, we said we can't table it, we can't continue it. I think procedurally they can withdraw it. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. They suggested it, it sounded like it.
I think the dilemma for the board is if they withdraw the administrative approval and they come back and request an administrative approval, you still have the same issue before you.
What's gonna change?
I think it might be optimal for the board to vote whether you want to proceed with an administrative approval or not, and then where you go from there.
I'm happy to make that motion, but I think we need to, I don't know that there's anything to be gained by more discussion.
Well, I agree, but there's something to be gained by having a week withdrawal and getting as many comments in to alleviate the concerns of the public, which I agree with. Procedures, I agree with the legal term you used, because I had forgot it, aesthesis or whatever it is.
Stare decisis.
We are not setting precedent. And we got two lawyers on the board. Precedent is a legal matter, and maybe people will think we are, but that's why we're on the board, to say there was a difference. We had a reason. And maybe we'll never apply it again, maybe there'll be something else. But that's why we're quasi-judicial, to weigh the pros and cons and say, gee whiz, there's something here. I respect the procedures, but they're not binding as a bylaw.
So if I can add one comment, it's, you know, I've mentioned that this building is essentially allowable as a by right use. It is allowable as by right size and footprint and setbacks. I'm fairly confident in saying that if the board asked us to, if the board denied this administratively and had us come back, that we would, in the end, receive approval. But it will take 3 months. It will take, maybe it's 11 weeks, maybe it's 13 weeks, but it's gonna take us essentially 3 months. And all that's gonna happen in that meantime, there's no change to the plans. The building's built. I understand the board's concern, but all that's gonna happen in that meantime is someone's gonna be very hurt financially. And it's not necessarily the developer that's gonna be hurt financially, it's Mr. Daly, unfortunately. So what I'm asking, understanding that this is not what the intended process is, but the board can make the decision to approve it if they choose to. And I think that it is simply, delaying the process for a risk that I don't think is there. I don't think you're setting any type of precedent. I don't think you're putting yourself in a situation where the bylaw can be circumvented, because we are here. We're in front of you and we're paying a penalty for it, but what we're trying to find a way is to avoid Mr. Daly paying that penalty as well.
I'll make a
Mr.
motion,
Chairman.
we approve the administrative change, subject to conditions.
Sorry, Jerry, your vote is?
Make a motion
He wants to move that we approve the
We're moving
administrative.
to approve.
With
Yeah.
conditions.
with conditions.
Can you do that? Maureen?
You guys can do whatever you want. I think.
We're not gonna challenge it.
What you need to do is determine if this falls within your rules
Yeah.
as an administrative approval. So I think
Well, I
you
think
need.
that's what
right.
Jerry's basically saying. He
And then
believes that
we go
it
from
does.
there.
And I think there could be some conditions, much of what they laid out, that we could assure the public input, the procedures, we could have a procedural meeting now that we have a full board, and update our procedures if necessary, based on the experience of today.
Question procedurally is, what is the vote required for approval of this motion? I'm not sure that it's supermajority on this.
I think it's a simple majority for administrative approval.
We have a second? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
All right, so Jerry's making the motion to administratively approve the project. Is there a
I'll
second?
second it,
With conditions.
with conditions.
With conditions. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So that's, fails to carry.
Okay, I think that resolves it, does it not?
I guess so. I don't know if
It's
there's an
not
appeal to our
administratively
procedures.
approved, they need to reopen the hearing and get it approved.
Can we reopen the hearing? Is there a way to try to speed up that process?
I'm sure there is.
I'm sure that the staff can accommodate you as quickly as possible.
Can they open the hearing and at the same time issue the permit?
2 or 3 months?
It'd be
No,
six-
we have to, the hearing is for the purpose of approving the
Right,
permit.
but in the
So it needs to be
meantime,
modified.
but if you give him an occupancy and the thing doesn't get approved, then he can move out. He'll have time to find another place and move out. go to the, an empty building up the street or something.
I've got way too much money into this building right now.
Oh, you have money into the building?
I've got equipment, I've
Oh,
got
yeah.
a health inspection 2 months ago. I mean, this has crippled me this winter, and I do have a successful catering business, but it's taken away from my catering business, and if I have to wait any more time, after 17 years, I will go out of business. And I'm not just saying that.
Could
I am
we-
gonna go out of business.
We applied, like, 2 years ago when I submitted this, if any way during this time, we ever were, I've had 20-something inspections with the town. We've walked it, we've had the plans out so many times. If we ever knew there was ever a discrepancy, we would have come to you guys right away. We did not know this.
The water's, excuse me, the water,
No,
Quick.
no, this needs to come to a stop.
Yeah, I
because we-
agree. I mean,
We
we-
voted on it.
I agree.
and
I agree with
all due
you.
respect to the entire situation, they need to apply for a
and
modification.
I agree with you. How quick can we get it through? That's all I'm
Which is-
asking.
Which
That's-
is what I'm trying to streamline.
Right.
Good. That's, we all
I
agree.
think every accommodation can be
I
made
think the
by,
board's completely
by the,
sympathetic to trying to
by
get
the
this done
appeals
quickly.
office. to
We
get it done
just
as
need to
quickly
do
as
it properly.
Yeah, the vote was taken.
So Noreen, when can we, what's as soon as we can get this thing back on
Public hearing.
for a modification?
I'll have an application in tomorrow. No, it's gonna be,
So it looks like the first date we could get them on a hearing complying with notice is July 11th.
so that puts you at mid-August for opening. After the appeal period.
Okay, do you need a motion to that effect?
No.
No, because they need to apply.
Right,
And then they'll be given the date.
Right.
So
Of
we'll
course.
we'll be anticipating that date.
You're kidding me.
I think the board made a mistake tonight.
All right. Next up on the open meeting agenda is the minutes from May 23rd, 2019. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Those of us who were on the board at that time?
Make a motion to approve?
Yeah, I looked at it.
All right. Move to approve, was that by Jerry?
Yes.
Is there a second by Ed? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. On to the third item on the open meeting, discussion and vote of special permit 115-18 Woods Hole Partners LLC, 533 Woods Hole Road.
Based on the hour, could we continue that? This is not gonna be a short discussion.
Well, I think it actually is gonna be a short discussion.
Okay, then, we'll move ahead.
Because I think the administrator has some, you wanna comment?
So regarding Woods Hole Road, I don't know if you want to review the existing conditions, and then you can determine whether you want to make changes to those, or if you want to discuss them at this point in time and then finalize them at a future meeting.
All right, so Noreen was kind enough to give us printouts of the draft decision, and with regard to the conditions, I know at least one draft was circulated earlier this week. Has everyone reviewed them?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we go condition by condition, line by line, or?
Condition by condition, I suppose.
That's,
I'll just read them off.
sure, hold on.
Construction shall be represented to the board and shown on the plan submitted and reviewed by the board entitled, and there's a list of conditions, list of plans submitted. regarding the site plan, site plate layout with the various buildings, their heights, the distances, verifications needed. With regard to F and G, there's heights that would need to be plugged in there.
I did receive those today.
Okay.
But just haven't been added to the decision.
Number 2 is the standard condition regarding any deviation, no matter how minor. Plans submitted would have to be approved ahead of time and approved by the board. 3 is construction hours.
It says 12 PM to. Zipping. It says Saturday, 12 noon to 7 at night. Is that right?
Is that something that was requested? I can't.
I don't.
It's
I don't
kind of
recall, I don't
unusual, I think, but I don't know.
I mean, usually it's 7 till 3 in the afternoon or something.
The only thing I can think of is that it sits between 2 hotel units
Yeah.
or residential units on weekends. So if they have people staying there early in the morning,
That's, okay,
12 makes more sense on Saturdays.
So that, well, somebody must have suggested that.
okay.
4, the applicant contacting the Falmouth Police Department to discuss coordination of traffic during construction, and the applicant will provide name and number of a project contact individual throughout the duration of the construction process to ensure that any questions or concerns, including those of the abutters, are timely managed. Paragraph 5 is in regard to the cease and desist order, that's on record.
That's being used as a parking lot now.
Right.
Nobody's enforcing that.
So it just conditions compliance.
Still subject to enforcement. 6 is with regard to the affordable housing rental units. It's gonna be included on the subsidized housing inventory and regulated as a LIP or local action unit through DHCD. And those units are gonna remain affordable in perpetuity and shall survive sale, and that's language that's reflective of LIP and 40B applications. 7, construction of the 4 affordable rental units shall be completed and occupancy permits issued no later than the date when occupancy permits have been issued for 5 of the market rate units. 4 affordable units shall be leased and occupied prior to the date when the 5 market units have been occupied. 8, the applicant assumes all related costs to the preservation and rehabilitation of the dome. There shall be a perpetual maintenance agreement for the dome, provided for through the Residents Condominium Association and as specified in the 2009 ZBA decision.
Has anybody read that?
Mm-hmm.
Back when it was made,
Right.
don't ask me to remember it.
And it is in the file, I do remember that
okay.
much right now. With regard to paragraph 9, the dome shall be preserved and rehabilitated to the standards of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, the Cape Cod Commission, and the Falmouth Historical Commission. There shall be a permanent historical preservation restriction as provided under Massachusetts general law, reported prior to the issuance of any building permit for residential structures, and a copy of the executed preservation restriction shall be filed with the ZBA. Use is restricted to that of a condo association common area, not for profit, 100,000 square feet. Access shall be attached, ADA compliant.
1,000 square feet.
I'm sorry, 1,000, thank you. Shall include some public access not to exceed the 8 parking spaces provided, proximate to the dome. Any additional parking proposed shall require modification to this decision.
Can I have a question? At one time, it was proposed that it be open to the public 1 day a month or something. Did that fall through the cracks? Is no longer?
No, there's, item 13 talks about public accessibility.
Okay, we'll get there when we get there.
10, the applicant's submitting to the Cape Cod Commission final specs and drawings for the work on the dome, as well as maintenance and funding plan for approval prior to commencement of the construction. 11, applicant shall receive substantial restoration, preservation of the dome within 3 years from issuance of a building permit for any residential building. Restoration for the dome shall be substantially complete prior to the issuance of a building permit for Building E, which is 13 units closest to the dome. Preservation for the dome will be paid by the applicant and shall be bonded. ZBA requires a $750,000 bond held by the town of Falmouth to ensure that further deterioration is prevented and that the...
Mr. Hurd, will you take any comment, because there was discussion about sharing this with the applicant, and we have submitted correspondence about it, and I think there are issues that the board should be aware of and think of it.
No, of course, Attorney Ahmed, I just wanted to get the,
If you want to do it all after you've gone through it, that's fine with me.
that's what I was intending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope in the final written version, we will not use K. It's a minor
Oh.
comment. And actually,
So that covers that
put 3
language.
zeros in there.
12, the premises shall have dark sky compliant lighting and shall not shed light off the premises in order not to adversely impact the abutters. 13, per the covenant with the community, or the Woods Hole Community Association, walking trails and outdoor recreation facilities shall be open to the public. The area around the dome shall be publicly accessible. The interior space of the dome shall be periodically accessible to the public. The applicant shall comply with the terms of the amendment to the covenant executed with Woods Hole Partners LLC on February 28th, 2018. Paragraph 14, the 16-foot easement chambers must be maintained, shown on the plans, and remain passable at all times. This easement shall be approved by the town engineer prior to the issuance of a building permit. A copy of the recorded easement plan shall be provided to the ZBA. 15, the building height is limited to a maximum 35 feet. Height certification shall be provided at foundation and framing for each structure, with a copy of that to the building commissioner and ZBA. 16, as-built for each structure shall be provided to the ZBA. 17, lot coverage by structures, paving, parking is limited to 40%. Lot coverage by structures is limited to 20%, and these requirements are stricter than provided for in the bylaws that apply to that property, but they do agree with the covenant that was mentioned. 18, the applicant shall meet the requirements of the DPW Engineering Water Division to include outstanding requirements, including but not limited to items specifically listed in a preliminary engineering review dated April 10th, 2019, and May 28th, 2019. Those conditions are listed. 19, the applicant shall meet the requirements of the planning board site plan approval, letter dated April 30th, 2019. 20, the applicant shall meet the requirements of the Board of Health. 21, the applicant shall meet the requirements of the Conservation Commission, including requirements specified in the May 22nd, 2019 letter from Mark, and I'm gonna butcher his last name, any help on that? Kasperzik. Related to the wetlands situated west of the premises, and an administrative review must be filed for permitting. 22, the applicant shall install an automatic fire sprinkler system, an automatic fire detection system, monitoring by a central monitoring company, and a knockbox entry for the Falmouth Fire and Rescue Department. 23, the Historical Commission has not reviewed the petition. However, the premises is subject to a certification of appropriateness for 4 buildings within the historical district as well as the dome itself. The applicant shall meet with the Historical Commission, and any changes made to this approval by the Historical Commission shall require the applicant to return to the ZBA. 24 is with regard to landscaping. It's installed as presented. Existing landscaping toward the north shall be maintained to the extent possible. There's extra verbiage there with regard to 25. It's the standard language regarding the special permit process and the waiting period. And 26, permit shall lapse under 3 years, under which the decision's filed with the town clerk's office if a substantial use of the special permit is not sooner commenced, and that's, and that mirrors MGL. And 27, the ZBA reserves the right to recall the applicant with such notice as the board deems proper to discuss unresolved matters of concern. So with those conditions having been said, Attorney Hammond, if you'd like to discuss your proposed conditions?
Well, as invited by the board, I did have an opportunity to review the draft decision. Actually, it was an earlier draft, which I received late on Tuesday of this week. And I submitted a letter midday yesterday, and then a couple of more comments this morning. I think what I'd like to do, you have that letter, you can go through it, but what I'd like to do is touch on issues really in order of importance, perhaps. I'd like to talk about the bond requirement. The cost of the proposed bond over the course of the project could cost as much as $300,000, and that's prohibited. And I don't think it's permitted by the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is very specific, and I discussed this in my letter. You can require, and should require, in fact, in many cases, a performance guarantee. But the nature of the performance guarantee under your bylaw is entirely in the discretion of the applicant as to whether it will be a bond or a covenant. And a covenant would be more than sufficient in this case if it provided, as you've put in this language, you're really asking for a covenant as well as a bond, and you can't do that because there's a condition that says that building E with 13 units in it cannot be started. Construction can't commence until a dome is substantially complete. Now, if you take away the 13 units from the 43-unit project, that would leave 30 units. 30 units is less than 6 per acre. This project could proceed without building E with no special permit. To require a bond as opposed to a covenant for on building E. One, I don't think it's allowed in the bylaw because the applicant has a choice if he can provide an adequate covenant. And it's a prohibitive expense. The goal here should be to make this project go forward, get the dome restored, not to have roadblocks that, one, aren't allowed by the bylaw, and two, which really will make the developer question whether he can proceed. So I ask you to simply require a performance guarantee and specify that a covenant that the building E not be occupied will be sufficient. So that's one pretty important issue. I'd like to just touch on a couple of things that are, I think, pretty clear but quick.
Oh, excuse
20
me.
paragraph.
Before you move off that subject, I just want to add in the information that we did receive an email today from the representative, the town's representative for the Historic Commission, who states that bond issue is something that they can look into as well. So if that's something that the board prefers to defer, we can certainly do that.
Well, that would be a good solution, at least for dealing with this board. Paragraph or condition 22 requires an automatic fire sprinkler system. I think it should be specified that that only applies to building A and E. All the other buildings are duplexes, which don't require sprinkler systems under the applicable codes, and that's a tremendously costly requirement, and I don't think you intended it to apply to those, but I think it should be specific so that it's not a question of the future. I don't think that the Board of Appeals should get into private property right issues such as the Chambers easement. Chambers does have an easement to cross through the property to get to his property, but in fact, for many decades, The access has not been where the easement is shown on the plan. It's blocked by huge boulders. He simply uses the driveway. Under Massachusetts law, an owner of property has a right to relocate an easement as long as adequate, the purposes of the easement are met. We do need to provide an easement for Chambers, but that's really a private matter, and I don't see why it's in your decision. It wasn't a subject that there was much discussion on. And there are actually 2 driveways onto this property, as you know. There will be a period of time, without question, that the easement in its location, first of all, in its historic location, which is different than what the plan of record shows, will not be available because of construction that's going on. That easement is going to have to be relocated, and temporarily, it will no doubt, access will be through the driveway that goes along the sands of time. I just think that this is an issue that the language that's in here suggests that we have to comply with some easement, and it's really not part of the Board of Appeals issues. So I have a problem
Just to
with that.
assist with that, we do have an email from the town engineer today who basically concurs. His comment was that requesting a plan with a proposed easement or note that covers the easement and that is endorsed by a land surveyor would be sufficient for the easement. So I think he's basically, the town engineer stating that as long as the easement's shown on a plan, that the town should be okay with that.
Well, how about a note on the plan that says that Chambers has a right of access to his property? I'm very troubled by the fact that the town engineer is getting involved in an easement issue.
So this is, just for a quick comment, so this is why I brought up the easement way back at the beginning of the process, only because I saw it posted on the tree that's at the property. And it seemed to be, say, very specific, it had to be 16 feet wide, and it had to go back to where his driveway was.
So you
my
read a
question-
notice posted, and suddenly that becomes the status of the law.
So
applicable
if
to
you
this property.
relocate the easement to the Sands of Time entrance, when I looked at the plan, the dome, not the Nautilus property shares that exit with Sands of Time. Is there anything that says the Chambers can use a portion on Sands of Time? Because there isn't enough square footage on the Nautilus side for him to pass on. So that's why I wanted to just see it on a plan to see if it worked, because if it's also an easement that is entrance and exit, and you relocate it to a one-way, he would then only be able to exit against traffic on the one-way. So that's why I just wanted to try to get clarification in advance, so we wouldn't get into this.
What the law provides, and it's the 2006 Supreme Judicial Court case, MPM Builders LLC versus Dwyer. It changed the law in Massachusetts.
Okay.
It now provides that an owner has a right to relocate an easement, provided that the access that is achieved to the easement holder is comparable to what the easement in a prior location would be.
So can they also reduce the size of the easement?
No, it's up to the, first of all, the owner has that right, but in order to prevent disagreements and fisticuffs, the court decision said you have to go to the land court, and the land court will confirm that adequate access is provided by the alternate route. We will do that or reach an agreement, which I think will happen because it happened between Wise and Chambers easily, as to where the easement should go. The easement, of course, should go on the driveways that are being developed as shown on the plan that you're approving. But this is a process. A condition that says that the Chambers easement has to be recognized or something is fine, but because it's just stating the law. But I think that the conditions, the way they're specified, that we must maintain that 16-foot easement, as shown on plans, I think is a mistake, and contrary to what the owner's rights are to relocate the easement as long as adequate access, the same access, is being provided to Chambers.
So has
Anyway,
the-
that's what I think.
If I could just pause it for just a second. We do need a vote to extend past 9:30, given the time. Does anyone want to make that motion?
Okay, so motion to remain past 9:30?
All right.
Second.
We'll give it 20 minutes for the rest of the, yeah.
So has any contact at all been made with Chambers throughout any of this process? And has there been any response? You probably know.
For the record, Mark Bogosian. Yes, we've made contact through Arnie from the Sands of Time. He's got a relationship with him. He was very hard for us to reach, so I tried to reach out myself numerous times. But Arnie does know him well and was very clear in saying, yep, what he said, when you're all done with everything, we'll sit down and go through it.
So is that coming from Chambers or coming from the neighbor next door? The neighbor next door?
But he's known him for quite some time. We definitely, there's going to be the easement.
Bob, would you be happy with, I mean, he cited a Supreme Court case, they come to an agreement.
I'm fine if they come to agreement. My only concern was if relocating, I don't have an issue with. But they're also gonna need to change the width of the easement because you cannot exit on the Sands of Time side.
That would be up to the land court to decide if it's applicable.
I mean, land court right now says it's 16 feet wide.
I don't know, I mean,
No, the land court hasn't said 16 feet. It
It
hasn't
seems
said
like-
anything about it.
It seems like it doesn't belong as a condition
yeah.
in the decision, a note on the plan. I agree with Bob, I hate to do it. but there you go.
Ding, 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 ding.
Or it can be a finding in the decision that Chambers has an easement across the
So
property
maybe just a
and must
finding
be
and then a notation on
accommodated.
the plan.
Because we don't know the final, they've got to
Yeah.
work out where the easement goes and all that.
And the width or
It-
whatever.
It's not gonna,
I think it was a fair issue to be raised, but so long as it's addressed
We can agree with a
properly.
note on the plan, or?
And then just put a finding in the,
A
That's
couple
a
of
finding.
quick things. Paragraph 13 talks about public access to walking trails in the dome and so on. It does refer to the amendment to the covenant with the Community Association. I think it's important to add language that says that all of that public access is subject to reasonable regulation by the owner or the condominium association, which is language that's in the covenant, and that's in the letter that I sent to the board. With regard to the lot coverage in paragraph 17, just to make a correction, 20% lot coverage by structures is in fact the limit in the zoning bylaw in the business redevelopment district. And so that requirement isn't any stricter than it's provided for in the bylaw. That is the bylaw requirement. And our plan meets that. I think the plan shows 19%. The next paragraph in 18 about the DPW requirements refers to an engineering review letter dated May 28, 2019. That's news to us. I mean, we haven't seen that. I don't know what it says. I hope that it says that the response that our engineer provided on April 26 covered most of the concerns of the engineering department, but I do have a problem with the fact that public comment was, and submission of documents was closed on May 23rd. We have a Conservation Commission, not even an agent submitting, Mark Kaspersik submitting concerns about wetlands, which have been demonstrated not to be within, our project is not within the jurisdiction. The time for referrals from town boards is 35 days from the referral date. So here we have stuff that comes in the afternoon before the deadline for submitting stuff, months after that, and raising issues which are just an opinion, and they work their way into decisions and then become difficult to deal with. I think the provision about the Conservation Commission, in this case, refers to Mr. Kaspersik's letter. I think we have to comply with Conservation Commission requirements. Why do we need to say more than that? You don't, Mr.
So you'll be applying to the Conservation Commission?
Of course. I mean,
Okay,
you
so-
don't, we have to comply with, we can't do things that violate the wetlands regulations. And if the Conservation Commission says that we need to file an administrative review, then we need to file administrative review. It has nothing to do with the Board of Appeals decision. In fact, we already did file it. It was filed this morning. So,
We back up to 18 about the, you saying he submitted that letter too late, May 28th letter? He's not the
Look.
public, he is a,
you know, once again, the fact is we need to get a building permit, and departments have to sign off on it. We have to meet requirements of the engineering department. But I don't know what that May 28 letter says.
would you say then it's, you know, everybody would in agreement, it should be covered by the building permit being issued?
I think whatever it might say with point number 6 under that paragraph, it references the earlier engineering letter dated April 10th. I think it might be covered there.
We did submit to the planning board, and this is really part of site plan review. We did submit to the planning board, but it wasn't submitted to the Board of Appeals, a response to that April 10th letter on April 26th. And it covered all issues but one, an issue that we felt was outside the scope of the town requirements, because it had to do with the 100-year storm, and the engineering department agreed that the town standard was for a 25-year storm. We have to work that out, and we will work it out pursuant to the site plan review requirements.
What's in the May 28 letter, Noreen?
So, yeah, because I don't see it in the file.
So this was actually a letter that was issued to the planning board and forwarded to us for, oh, excuse me, I'm looking at a different project. I will double check on that.
I mean, I just think maybe we should strike that.
Yeah, I could live with striking it since,
I mean, we don't even know what's in it.
you know, it went to,
Because the April 10th date's in here.
any other board member object to striking it?
Well, somebody put it in here for a reason, right?
Yeah, I'll double check it. It could be an error.
So maybe we could just review it later and
Yeah.
see.
There is an error at the beginning of the conditions where it refers, bottom of page 10 refers to 43 residential for sale market rate units. That's a mistake, because it should say 48 residential units, and then parentheses 39 for sale market rate units or for affordable rental units. And that's correctly stated elsewhere in the decision, but it is an error
48
there.
residential.
43.
There are 43 residential units, 39 market rate for sale units, and 4 affordable rental
Gotcha.
units. On the same page, these are conditions, but number E refers to managing all drainage on site, and as I pointed out, there's a great reduction in stormwater runoff from the site as a result of the project, but all stormwater isn't contained on site. There will still be, in severe storms, some water that leaves the site because of the topography. But I believe it's about a 90% reduction as a result of this project. So language elsewhere in the conditions, I think, is okay, because it talks about managing and then says there'll be no increase in runoff. So Ms. Stockman added that language. And then F refers to an existing dwelling on site. There really isn't any existing dwelling on site. I think there might have been an apartment with the motel a zillion years ago, but I think that language doesn't, is just inaccurate.
Where are we, what page?
That
10.
was on
Page 10.
page 10. Condition 8 says that the applicant assumes all costs related to preservation and rehabilitation of the dome. And we have to rehabilitate and preserve the dome. There might be different ways of doing that preservation, and that would be approved, but there might be some projects that would be more expensive that might be possible. There might be applications made for grants. There might be groups that are interested in helping to fund certain improvements. So the language says the applicant assumes all costs, and I just want it understood that that doesn't mean that the applicant can't work with others to see that the work is done.
All,
He would just be responsible to figure out the financing.
Yeah, I think that,
So I don't think it hurts, I don't think the sentence hurts, he could still bring outside parties.
no, it's a condition of the project that the dome be preserved and
That's-
rehabilitated, period, you know?
and MHC will dictate how, right? To a certain extent.
Basically, that's true. That's right. And I'd like to go back to the paragraph, condition 2, which has the language, as you can see how difficult a situation can arise from your last discussion on 587 Main Street. The language is changes made prior to approval shall be subject to a full hearing. And there needs to be some way to address changes that are so immaterial that they don't meet any deviation, no matter how minor standard that is. You know, it's a change.
How about we say may?
Well, you could say may, or you could refer to material changes. You know, if they're immaterial, the board should have the ability to avoid the 3-month process that you're going through in that other case.
It says.
There just needs to be some flexibility
I
in.
think the first sentence is fine, Bob.
I have no problem with the first
They shall be submitted to the board for approval. It doesn't, however, that doesn't mean that it has to lead to a hearing.
No, it's the second.
Right.
I have no,
So
the
we need
first
some
sentence is.
language that says minor changes may be approved administratively, or minor changes.
Those.
If the board determines changes.
What you're
are minor.
referring to, the first sentence and the second sentence, which was there and has been removed, I don't know why. Those are customary, that's
Right.
customary language, it's always in your decisions and it's fine. What I'm concerned about is this language, which may be a new customary language, that says, that addresses this problem, it addresses the
Shall be subject to
mistakes.
full hearing.
Shall be subject to, that shall is going to bind the board.
Right.
It could be may, it should be only material changes. I know you'll get in a question of what's material.
If we
But
eliminate it.
you need to give yourself the
I
flexibility
think there just
of
needs to
dealing.
be an additional sentence that says, determine whether these can be approved administratively or must be, approved through the hearing process.
That's fine, and I understand you're trying to deal,
So
you're
if you
trying
said
to.
something like the board
You're putting people on notice that we really mean that first sentence. Any change has to come back, and if you make a change, but as you can see, they will happen, and some will be very minor, and you won't want to have to put people through the full hearing process. So give yourselves the ability to do that. So I think that's pretty much it. I think the real big concern is the performance guarantee language, and I think it's inconsistent with the zoning bylaw, and it shouldn't be required the way it is. I mean, I think a performance guarantee can be required, but I think we have the right under the bylaw to provide a covenant as opposed to a cash bond. And 2, I think in this case, the restriction against proceeding with building E is the right restriction, the right covenant to provide the assurance. keep in mind that that even before we can proceed, we have to have the preservation restriction in place. In order to do that, all the detailed plans for what's going to happen to the dome have to be made. The Cape Cod Commission is very interested in that subject, and their decision requires their approval of the terms of the preservation restriction and the maintenance agreement. And we're not going to be able to get occupancy of the project, certainly not full occupancy from the Cape Cod Commission without having the dome renovated. And we only have, under your decision, we're not objecting to the provision that says we have to do that within 3 years. This project is going to take longer, probably longer to complete, certainly with those buildings. But we understand and agree that we have to complete the renovation of the dome within the first 3 years of the project.
I have no objection to the covenant language.
No, I think the performance guarantee is fine, since Historic said anyways, if they decided they want to do a bond, they could
Yeah.
take it out.
The other thing is, I had thought maybe it was another project, there was some revised findings that was submitted by Mr. Amat. Maybe it's another project.
I did suggest a number of conditions that might relate to the dome in previous correspondence about the use of the dome. But I think that the agreement as drafted with my suggestions pretty much covers those.
Okay.
Those.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a little more work to do on this?
Yeah, I think
I
you're
would say
really
so.
close, but I don't think you're gonna do it. I think, I think you're running out of time to make a decision on these things, but I guess you need to, if you could instruct Noreen on some of them, she could then pretty quickly make the changes. And I know that you'll need, if you're meeting next week, hopefully it could be done at that time.
Noreen,
I
could you-
think that would be appropriate.
So-
Noreen, would that be able to be done by next week?
Yes.
I mean, that means you make the changes, they go back to Attorney Amat, and this is a lot. I know
But she
you
probably
think-
needs to know which changes
Yeah.
that I've
Right,
requested
so-
you're agreeable to.
Well,
So then I'd make a motion to instruct the administrator to revise with the changes that were discussed this evening,
And
and then-
consult with
and
Attorney.
then consult with any needed professionals, and then submit them to the board for review again.
Did you submit them in writing?
Yeah.
You did submit them in writing.
Yeah.
Well, he's going.
I did, and we can suggest the changes, and this document's good at drafting them too.
Okay, all right, so the motion was made by Bob and second by Ed, directing Noreen to make the,
Let me just add, I hope we could include in that comments from the board on the draft.
Yes, correct.
And Ken, you have some.
As so
comments?
moved.
Right. I've
to
been
be
making-
prepared for next meeting. Motion was made by Bob, second by Ed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You want a continuation for final?
Do we need it? I guess so.
I think you do, because technically, I think we'll
So our next meeting, I think, is June 6th.
Yes.
Do you
Yep.
want to put
Maybe Bob will agree with, I mean, Ken will agree with you at the next meeting too.
There's always that chance.
Attorney Emmett? All right, moving on to the rest of our open meeting items, board updates.
No updates.
James, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Happy to have you. We're at full contingency here, so it's, happy to have a full board once again. It's been a long time in the making, so.
Could we,
For-
I'm sorry, send
Yep.
suggestions to Noreen as to topics for the planning, retreat?
Right.
Even though we don't have a date yet. but-
So now that we do have a full board, Mary and James, it's typical for the board to have a workshop once a year, typically around June, so we're kind of coincidentally, we're coming up around when we usually have one. We haven't even thought about a date yet, because we've been holding back, hoping to have a full board before we choose a date, so we'll just, food for thought for maybe next time, we'll think about some dates.
And think of the food, because it's a potluck.
Right, and we usually hold it in the morning on a Saturday somewhere in Town Hall. We bring
Everyone
breakfast
brings a
items,
dish.
and-
All new board members are responsible for the
Food. And we can send suggestions to Noreen that she can, for agenda items?
We always can.
Okay.
So that takes care of that. Board discussion regarding the zoning recodification committee. Is there any update?
No, there's gonna be another meeting at future date.
All right, do we know when that meeting is? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Well, I can send it out, I think did they say the 11th? I can't remember.
Oh, that'll be a busy day for you.
If we don't, we don't. Oh, you can check with Mr. Bott.
All right. Future agenda items, anything?
Not at this point.
All right.
Move to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
It's almost 10 o'clock. I think that's appropriate. Meeting adjourned.